Okay, so it looks like we've got 26 participants. We're ready to get started, and we'll get going. So if everybody's at the same screen as I am here, and the splash screen is what they call this, um, you might notice that I might be using a more recent version than you. This is the latest release. So if at any point during um, the successive days when we're using Microvellum, something about the interface looks different from yours, it could be that you're not on the latest version. So I would recommend that you upgrade if you want to follow along exactly, but most things are going to be very similar. As I mentioned, we're just doing AutoCAD things today. So if you are on a different version and you're planning on upgrading, you can do that at the end of the day today and be ready for the successive days that are coming. I'm also in the future going to be using the 46.2 version of the library. So if there's something about the library that's different, that's why I'm using that one. All right, so if you're at the same point as me, then we are ready to hit the Start Toolbox button. And if you've just installed and you haven't done anything from a bare bones installation, then your installation is going to look the same as mine. You're going to have a command line bar and no interfaces, or you will have the Microvellum interface up here, but like I said, we're not using that today, so I've just hidden it. So it's going to be tucked away so that I have more workspace. I have changed one preference. I like having the grid lines go all the way across the screen. It also makes it easier for you to see my cursor. So if you can't find it at any point, you can see the lines and where those lead. So one of the first things that we do for most installations is to have the menu options opened. So once you click this drop down, you can open up this workspace. And this is the easiest way to import most of the default AutoCAD options and toolbars. So once you hit this drop down and you bring up what's called the workspace selection. What a workspace is a collection of all the toolbars and basically everything that you see on the screen. So if you hit that drop down, open up a workspace, or allow yourself to select a workspace, and then select this drop down. This drop down has several options. What we're currently using is the Toolbox default, and that allows you to focus on Microvellum because it doesn't have any of the other AutoCAD features. But if you want to use those AutoCAD features, you hit the 2D drafting and annotation. And that brings up the typical set of toolboxes and locations for toolbars. So we're using the 2D drafting and annotation. One thing I have also done for this one is I hit the drop down and I said show menu bar. Mine currently says hide menu bar because I've already got it shown. But if you hit show menu bar, then you'll get, right now it looks like this, but if you hit show menu bar, you get this menu bar with the typical selections of file, edit, all of the normal options that you can have. We're going to use that, so make sure that you have that showing. Also, if your Microvellum got hidden during that process, if you haven't modified it to show Microvellum, what you can do is type in, so for instance, I'm going to close mine. Let's see, there's usually it disappears. I've already got it saved in my 2D drafting and annotation, so let me switch to 3D modeling. Nope, it's there as well. In any case, if it disappeared for you, what you do is you type in MVTB7, and that will relaunch the splash screen and allow you to bring back that toolbar. Once you've got this set up in a way that you like it with Microvellum and any other, I tend to have properties open just because I refer to it quite frequently, and you've got the menu bar, you want to save current as, and then type in the name of your company or even just your first name. I type in whatever you would like to call it and save that. That will make it so that every time you reopen AutoCAD, it's going to drop back into this workspace and it's always going to look the same every time we reopen it. Okay. Okay, we'll give it another minute for people to catch up with that. Make sure everything's where it is. I'm going to be using the ribbon so that I can show you what commands I'm doing, but also I'm going to be using the command line to type in a lot of commands. That is the fastest way to access a lot of things because sometimes it's buried within a few of these tabs on the ribbon, and you don't necessarily want to come up here every time you want to draw a line. But if you have to, if you are able to use your left hand, because it's not really, it's on the keyboard, but it's not really using anything at that moment, you could type in a L for line and draw a line without having to move all the way up to here and then come back. So this is the command line here. And you can see the previously used commands by hitting this command history. And you can see all the commands that have been run up until this point. And then it closes to give you more workspace. If you have it docked, it'll take up a little bit more room along the bottom, but then some people like that because it doesn't have, you can resize it to show different amount of lines. I know a lot of people, if they're longtime users of AutoCAD, they'll have a lot of toolbars across the screen in multiple places. That used to be the way that they were organized, and you can still do that. AutoCAD continues to maintain backwards compatibility with a lot of their features, but the ribbon allows for contextual options and buttons that show up. So when I go in to do something like edit a block, it will come up with an additional tab that doesn't appear right now. It's called block editing, and that will show up so that I have the tools for working with blocks. And so that's one of the things that I really like about the ribbon. I don't necessarily need the draw commands or the modify commands because I already know what the keyboard shortcuts are for them, so I don't need those on this interface, but it is still helpful to have them, or I still keep around the ribbon because it has those contextual drop downs that show up once in a while. So we're going to have those also. Okay. All right. So we'll definitely get right into the basic commands within AutoCAD. So this is going to be reviewed for the people that have used AutoCAD before, but this is definitely something that's very essential for people that are new users to AutoCAD. And you may or may not find a few things that tips and tricks that you weren't aware of in the past. So we'll get started with that. Up here in the top left, we have your basic new drawing, open drawing, save, and then you have the undo and redo buttons. You can hit the drop down and see a list of commands that have been run, and you can back up all the way until a certain command. So you undo all 6 of these instead of having to hit undo multiple times. Or you can also redo. You have a print or plot button here that opens up the print and plot dialog. You can, we'll go through those as the last item on our agenda for today, actually, and check those out. Also, you can use the command line, as I mentioned before. You can enter commands instead of going up to the ribbon or any toolbars in order to click on them. So at any point, if you're typing, right now I have dynamic input on, so it's going to give me a command line right next to the cursor, which is easier than looking down at the command line, but this is the same as the command line. So if I click in the command line and type L, let me see, click in there, type L, I-N-E, it's going to bring up a list of commands that start with that. So you've got that, and you can see a list of all of the commands that start with that, and it will automatically fill the rest of the command when you do that. Same thing for when it pops up. If I type in line, it's going to give me a list of the commands that contain the word line in it, so that if you can't remember exactly what a command is, but you know something that's included, or if you type it in, then you can get that. If you type in just a portion of it, you can hit tab and it'll move down to the next one, or you can hit enter, like I type in LI and I know it's on. If it's on the one that I want, then you just hit enter and it'll complete the command, and you can continue that command from there. You're well aware of what the mouse does, but in AutoCAD, you want to remember that left click is how to select and window objects. If you just click and drag, you're going to get a window box. And something I see a lot of new users struggle with is dragging down and to the left gives you the dotted lines around the window selection. You can call that dancing ants, some people, but it's just a dashed line, and it gives you a green outline of what you're selecting. That's a newer feature. I think it was 2015 or something that they added that. Gives you a little bit more of a visual indication of what you're doing. So dragging to the left will give you the dotted lines, dancing ants, the green outline, and that means that you're selecting everything that the dotted line touches. And so you're selecting everything within and that dotted line touches. But if you do the opposite, you drag to the right, you're going to get a blue solid line. What that means is you're only selecting the things that are completely contained within this selection box. I can demonstrate that later. Right now we don't have any objects in our drawing, but we want to cover these options before we start doing things like adding things to our drawing. So drag to the right, you get blue. Whether you go up or down, you still get blue. And then you go to the left, you get green and a dancing ants. Also, with a few of the newer ones, I think it was 2016, that they added that you can click and hold. And that's also something that people new to the program have to get used to. Is if you click and hold, you get a selection, a freeform selection, rather than the box. So if you go around, you start moving to the left, then you get the dancing ants. If you start moving to the right, you get a freeform selection, but it is the specific inclusion of only things that are within the blue. So if you have a very strange shape, it's kind of there is a fence command, if you're familiar with AutoCAD, that helped you do this previously, but this is a much more fluid and much, in my opinion, better interface for that, using the click and hold to get the odd shapes for your selection. So you can do that. Right click brings up shortcut menus, just like any other Windows interface, but if you hold shift and right click, you're going to get a different selection of interfaces, and that's going to be our another topic that we're going to talk about, what these buttons do, but you can access those. So you shift, right click. If you hold the shift and then right click on that, you'll get a different set of shortcuts. So right click, shortcut. You can set up right click to automatically continue your last command or restart your last command, but then that would limit your options for when you're able to hit the shortcut menus. So just keep that in mind. Mine is currently set up so that when I have nothing selected, it's going to do the shortcut menu. So if you right click, it might do something different if you've customized that. Okay. All right. So you also have access to your templates. Microvellum sends templates, and those are included in every library release, but also your your AutoCAD installation is going to have AutoCAD templates. What I'm working in right now is an AutoCAD template. The drawing one that typically opens is going to be a file from your AutoCAD templates. If you hit new, it should take you to your template drawing or your template folder. this is the template folder within your AutoCAD installation. But if you go to wherever your toolbox installation is and your library installation, you have drawing templates for Microvellum. So we'll get into those a little bit later, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware of where those are. It's in your factory database folder. So for instance, I've got common Microvellum data, and then I'm currently in 46.2 drawing templates. So if you need to make changes to your template, every time you open a room, you get a copy of your template, and that's your current DWG. If there's something wrong with that DWG or something that you'd like to change because you change it every single time, what you do is you go into your template, make that change there, and then every time you make a new job, it's going to come up with that change already made in it. So we have a few. If you don't already have a 46 or a 47 version series library, then we can get you these templates because we're going to use them tomorrow in our next class. So we can do that. We're still going to stick in the AutoCAD drawing, this DWG drawing 1. So we can stick with that for now, but a little bit later we're going to switch into one of our templates. Okay, so the difference between a DWT and a DWG is that a DWT is that template file, but a DWG is a file that you're working in and that you're going to have drawings in. You have objects in it and it's going to be used. That's really the only difference between a DWT and a DWG. If you make changes to something and you want to save it as your new template, you can change the file extension from DWG to DWT, or you can hit File, Save As, and that is going to allow you to drop down and save as a DWT. So you can convert any DWT into a DWG or vice versa, a DWG to a DWT. And it won't make any difference. It just will refer to it, and it can be selected as your default drawing so that when you open drawing 1, it will open that drawing instead of this blank drawing with nothing in the layouts and nothing in the model space if you wanted to add things to the model space. So we might have some people using metric as well as imperial. That gets into units. So if you hit units, it'll bring up the units dialog. It'll allow you to select either decimal or architectural. I think we always have decimal in our drawings because we want to show inches instead of architectural, which will show feet and inches. So if you do decimal, then you're safe. But then to scale, that setting will probably be different if you're in metric because you don't want to scale to inches. You'd scale to millimeters or something when you're inserting. So just to be aware, units is where you select what you're using as your units. So it should be set up correctly to start with, but if you find a drawing that comes in and it's not scaled the way that you want it to be, then you can make that modification here. Okay. All right. So model space is designed to be infinite. If you keep, actually we're going to cover zooming next, but if you, so getting back to units, units in the DWG are just the number, they're an exact measurement. So it's 1 unit is whether you've selected metric or imperial units, it's just one of whatever unit that you have selected. So if you draw a line that's 1 long, depending on what you're using, it's going to be 1 inch, 1 millimeter, or perhaps 1 centimeter long. So model space doesn't care what size or what unit you're actually using. Paperspace takes care of that. But what you want to draw is everything at full scale. It's a 1-to-1 scale. So 1 of whatever unit you're using, either metric or imperial, is 1 length of that unit. So You can keep that in mind. It's designed to be infinite, so you can draw buildings on here, or you can draw just one room, but you draw them always at full scale so that whenever you want to show a part of it, you can then show that part of it, and Paperspace will take care of the scaling for you, and it will always be accurate. So whenever you're in model space, it wasn't always this way. Some people got into the habit of drawing detail drawings and then scaling them up using a command to scale it by 12, and that would be quarter-inch scale, I think. So then you'd have a drawing of cabinetry, in our case, and then you'd have a section, and that section would be much larger than the drawing of the cabinetry. But that's not necessary now since the implementation of Paperspace. So we want to recommend drawing everything in model space to a full scale, and then later going in and being able to scale those using Paperspace. Okay, so very good. We're good to go. So we're moving right along to the next topic of viewing, and then we're going to get into the pan and zooming topics. Okay, so in this interface, you have your cursor, and that's going to determine the location that you're either zooming into or zooming out of. So I'm going to center on my UCS, my 0, 0 of my drawing, and I'm going to zoom out. The 0, 0 is going to stay right in the middle of the drawing as long as I can keep it highlighted. But if I move my cursor up to the top right and I zoom out, you'll notice it doesn't stay centered. I zoomed out from the exact location where my cursor is. And then if I move down to the bottom right, the opposite happens. It moves, it looks like it gets smaller into the bottom left of the screen. So that allows you to zoom out when you're looking at something and then move your cursor over and zoom in and look at something else. So you'll get in the habit of doing that a lot with your middle mouse wheel. That's going to zoom in and out on your drawing. You can also use the zoom keyboard input. If you hit Z, that's going to bring up the options for zoom. You can zoom all, center, dynamic, extents, previous, scale, window, object. So if you zoom all, you just hit A as the shortcut for that, and it will zoom everything in the drawing, which in this drawing there's nothing in the drawing, but my typical commands are zoom, extents, and that will zoom also to everything that's in your drawing, all of the parts that exist in your drawing, and it will show all of them on your screen. So if you've got something wayward way out here on the left, it will zoom out to it, and then you'll see it and you'll know that it's there, and you can erase it, or you can find it at least, and then zoom in on the objects you're actually planning on working with. So you can work with that. So yeah, so zoom extents is usually how I get back to my full view and I can see everything and then zoom in on it. But if you know where something is in relation to where you're at, you can zoom over, you zoom out and zoom back in. Also, if you know that you're really close to something, you just want to center it better or scroll a little bit to the right, you can hold down your scroll wheel, the middle mouse button, and that'll turn it into a pan command. And that'll allow you to scroll over, and it just moves around just like any other pan command, but that's how you activate it. It's holding the middle mouse button or typing in the actual pan command, and then you can activate it with the left click. And then to exit a command, you can press escape or enter, or right click to display shortcut menu. So I'm just going to hit enter or spacebar to enter that command. Okay, very good. We've got a couple other options for that. The other option under viewing is that of how to handle overlapping objects. So I'm just really quick going to draw a couple of objects. We haven't covered how to draw objects yet, but we will get back to this. Let's turn these into a region. Okay, and then hide. Shade. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to put, okay, so these two objects are intersecting. Let's change one of them's color to red. Okay, so this white one is on top of the red one. But to demonstrate draw order, you can select this object, right-click, and go to draw order and send to back. There you go. And when it regenerated, you could see that it was now underneath the red object. Let me grab the line as well. Draw order, send to back. All right. So the line's not cooperating, probably because they're both coplanar. So they're both on the same plane. But if you have things on the same plane and they're intersecting, you can select the draw order and send things to back or bring them to front and cause them to show up instead of the other. So these two lines, these two regions are either on top or below, and that's how you can reveal or hide one or the other. So like I said, you can right-click to get to those menus, or it's under the Modify and Draw Order. I don't see it here, actually. And yeah, I don't see it in this ribbon. It might be here. Draw Order. Yeah, I don't see it in where I'm expecting to see it. But yes, you can still right-click and get to it, Draw Order, and this is how I usually access it. It's pretty quick and easy. Okay, and we'll go ahead and move right along. So now let's move on to geometry and show how to draw objects like this. So Microvellum is going to handle most of your drawing needs. It's going to drop in elevations, plan views, 3D objects, and allow you to, it's going to do all that for you. But for you to add more detail and add other objects into your elevations for clarity and for ease of reading, then you're going to need to know these commands. So we'll go ahead and start with the draw commands up here in the top left. You've got, first of all, the basic unit of any drawing is a line. So you can either click on this, or as I showed earlier, you can type in L, enter, and put in a line. If you need to start it at a specific point, you can hit 0, 0, and that'll specify the two vectors X and Y of where to put that. And so it's going to start at the origin of my drawing, and that's at 0, 0. So you can take this line and drag it in any direction. You can see right below my cursor to the bottom, or lower and to the right, it says polar. That is because I've got a polar tracking enabled down in this area here. And what this polar does is it restricts cursor to specified angles. So I'm at 0 degrees angle. So it's drawing a straight line to the right. But if I bring that around, it's going to snap to another angle. This one's snapping to a 45 angle. And this one's snapping directly to a 90 angle. Or where's this one? 135, 180. 135, 90, 45, and then back to 0. So you can specify which angles this is going to restrict you to by hitting this flyout and either specifying just 90-degree angles, 45s, 30, 23, 18, 15. 15 is pretty much the lowest that I go to, but if you're trying to specify something else, then you can definitely go down to 5 degrees of increments, and it's going to snap quite frequently as you go around. So you can use polar or you can use what's called ortho. And ortho will restrict you strictly to 90-degree angles. So it's like polar, but it's more restrictive. It won't allow you to select anything in between these 90s. Whereas if I go back to this 45, I can either intentionally or unintentionally select something on one of these other degrees that's not a 45. But I have to be close to a 45 for it to snap there. So I could do a 22-degree angle, but it wouldn't be an exact 22. It would be because it doesn't snap to it. It won't be perfect. So, for instance, if you were drawing a line without that, there would be no way to get it at an exact angle. So I definitely recommend having either polar or ortho on. But if you have some case where you're just freehand drawing, then you could turn those off in this location. Okay, so that's the first one is line. So hitting a line, gonna do that at 0, 0. That's the point of origin. And then drag out and put in, let's say, a 24-inch line. Okay, so it draws a line from there in the direction that I specified, 24 inches. Now I can go straight up and do the same thing, another 24, to the right, 24, and down, again, 24. So now I've drawn a box. It's complete. I'm going to hit spacebar to finish the command or close the command. And then I'm going to regenerate. It's a helpful command. RE refreshes everything that you can see, and it will redraw the objects on your monitor. So I'm going to hit RE just to refresh. Okay. It didn't have the effect I was looking for. I was hoping that this grid would get a little bit smaller. I tend to not work with that grid on. You can turn it off. But to help you see what we're working with and that things are actually changing, I'm going to leave it on just for now. But if you don't like it, you can turn it off, or you can change the properties about it in the settings. Okay, so now I've got a line. It's 24 by, or I've got a line that makes a square that's 24 by 24. So you can then see the coordinate system that you probably remember from geometry. You have your x, y, and z coordinates. So y goes up and down, x goes left and right, but everything positive is up and to the right. So this area is positive here. This is x comes first, so this is negative, positive, and this is negative, negative, and this is positive, negative, if you happen to remember your early geometry classes. So I typed in 24 along the x-axis, and then it was 24, 24 along the y-axis. You can see that in action if you select your lines and then go to properties. You'll see your start x is 24, your end x is 24, your end y is 24, whereas your start y is 0. So 24, 0, 24, 24. So if you draw all of your objects according to this coordinate system, it makes reading the properties much easier. So starting a drawing at 0, 0, it can be helpful, but also keep in mind that all of your drawings, regardless of where they are, can stay relative to each other. So you can measure objects such as this box. So if I didn't draw this at the 0, 0 coordinate system, I draw it somewhere way over here, I can still get the length off of that and see that it's 24 inches long. Or you can use a DI command and select, and that gives you the distance. So I've got distance of 24, and then I'll demonstrate in just a second what this delta x is. So I've got a distance from here to here of 24. Now I'm going to get a DI from this corner down to the bottom corner, and that's going to give me a distance of 33.94, but that's not super helpful. So delta x is 24 by negative 24. So in relation to this point, the point down here is 24 in the x and negative 24 in the y. So I just got a question about bringing up the properties window. I already had it docked over here on the right, but if you don't have it, what you can do is type in properties and hit enter. So let me close mine and then type in properties, and that'll bring it up. And then if you hit this button here, it should, let me tell you, come on. Okay, well, it's not popping up to say what it's going to do, but if you hit that button, it's going to either show, or if you hit it when it looks like that, it'll automatically hide. And then I just hovered over it to bring it up. And then it disappears when I'm not hovering over it so that I have more workspace. Okay, very good. So we've got our 24 by 24 box. It's a typical cabinet, the base cabinet. So for instance, we can continue with that. So you can use lines to draw your objects, or you can use lines as references. So if I wanted to split this cabinet in half, I'm using these snap points. So this is why a midpoint is going to show up for me. I'm going to show L, and it's going to grab that midpoint, and then I'm going to grab the other midpoint of the opposing line. That midpoint was turned on in this snap cursor to 2D reference points. It's commonly referred to as OSNAP or object snap. If you click this drop down or fly out, it's going to show you which points you're currently enabled snap to. So endpoints, midpoints, the center of a circle, I find those very helpful. Intersections, where two lines cross, is helpful, and perpendicular. So if you have at least those, maybe some more turned on, then you'll be able to do what I'm going to do in the drawings for now. So that's the object snap, and then these buttons. If you need to see it again, let me know. So I gripped the midpoint across to the midpoint. And so if I wanted to split these lines into 12-inch lines, I could use that command to draw one across the other. And then I know where that midpoint is. Other than the snap point, I know where that midpoint is. Then I could draw another line across from the other midpoints, and I know where the geometric center of this square is. It's at the intersection of these two lines. So once you're done with them, you can just hit E or use the erase tool, and that'll erase them. And so if, say I wanted to, I'm going to undo that for a second. Say I wanted to put a circle at the very center of this this square, you just hit C, or sorry, CC, sorry. Yeah, it is C for you. But for me, I've overridden it because I like copy as my C. So for you, it's going to be C or CI to do circle. And now I'm going to grab the midpoint and drag it out, and you can specify the radius, or if you hit D, enter, that will allow you to hit the diameter. So you can either do a radius or a diameter and type in something like 6. And as long as you're typing in the diameter or snapping to a point, you can rely on your drawings to be accurate. If you tried to click on 6, if you click and drag this out and you try to click on, that was a 6-inch diameter, so let's go 6-inch radius this time. If I tried to click on 6, it would be really hard or impossible. But you'll see there's pop-ups, and there's, when you're dragging, you can see that dynamic input box come up where I can type in just 6 and it'll make it 6. So using the keyboard, using your properties and typing, it's going to keep your drawings accurate. Also, you could use your snap points. If I drew another line at the midpoint of this line, if I drew another line across here, so now I've got 2 lines overlapping. That's not a great idea, but if you draw another line, and let me erase that first line, and use a snap point, I could also rely on this snap point. That end point of that line is going to be where I want it to be, and you can use that line as a reference and then just erase it, and then erase this, and I've got a circle that is in the very center of my square. I can hit DI to double check that, and I can see that delta X and delta Y are both 12. So I've definitely got that square in the center of my square, and it's an accurate drawing. So you can use that for a square washer if you wanted, and it's kind of big at 1212, but 24 by 24, but still, it's an accurate drawing. Another one of the interface commands is to move. So you want to be aware of modifying. So if you know that you can move something, you're going to move something relative to a separate point. So we're going to cover that later, but move command is an M. So if you hit M and then you click on a relative point, this is your base point where you're going to move it from. Think of it as where you're going to grab the object that you're moving. So I'm going to grab it here and then move it straight up. So I want to move it, say, to this line here. That is a move straight up. So I've got my polar tracking on, so it's going to help me move straight up. And I know to get it to the top of that square, it's 12 inches up. So I can type in 12, and it moves exactly there. So you can move using that command. That's another way for me to get it to the center of this square. I could start with it here, and then just move. And for the first move, I'm going to use reference points on the object. So this center point, I know that the end point is my center point, so I can grab that snap point, move it to the center of this line, and then move it down 12 inches. And that's just another way for me to achieve the circle in the center of this square without using those line commands. So you can use lines. Sometimes you don't have to. Whatever you find is the fastest and makes the most logical sense to you, that is the way that you want to do it, because first of all, it has to be accurate, but then it has to make sense to you for you to actually use it. But then whatever's fastest is going to get your drawing done the fastest, and time is money, so you want to get it done quick. So we've got our circle in the center of the square, and we're good to go. So you can also do a rectangle. You'll notice that these lines are all individual lines. They're separate lines. But if you want to draw a rectangle, you can hit REC or use this button on your toolbar, rectangle, and then click. And it'll ask you it asked me for a base point, so I clicked somewhere. Doesn't necessarily matter where. But now it's asking for another corner point. So if you, common thing that I see people run into is that they type in something, because usually you'll type in a vector, 10, 10, and I hit enter. It actually did. They must have changed that, because it usually goes to the point of origin. If you're using older versions of AutoCAD, what you have to do is you click, and then you'll say @ and then type in what you want to be. So you're going to say that this point is going to be relative to your first point. So I'm going to say @ 10, 10, and it's actually going to give me the same result. So that's not as useful as it used to be, because they seem to have noticed that and fixed it for new users. In the past, what you would do is you type in rectangle, you click a point, and then if you specified a point, it would give you that point in the grid system. So 10, 10 would be somewhere over here, and it would give me a funny square. But in any case, it's you've got a 10 by 10 square in this drawing now. So we're good to go. Let's start making this drawing actually useful, because now we've got a few commands under our belt. We can make something like a plan view section of a cabinet. So Microvellum has the capability of making plan sections, but if you have to make modifications to it, or you want to draw one freehand, then we'll demonstrate how we can do that. So We can get rid of this circle. We don't need that anymore. But we can draw another rectangle. And let's make a door. So we're going to click here and drag over to the midpoint. There it is. And drag down. You'll notice you get a perpendicular interface. So you can type at this point 0.75, and it's going to give you a 0.75 distance down along where you had your cursor at that point. So we stopped at the midpoint, went straight down, and typed in 0.75. So it gave us a 0.75 wide door, or thickness door. So we can then use the copy command. So hit CO, and we're going to grab this door and place it at the midpoint as well to put another door on the front of the cabinet. It's not quite accurate at this point. All we have is the external lines for the carcass, and we've got 2 rectangles for the doors, but we need a door gap. So let's move, hit an M command, and then enter, and select what objects you want to move. I'm dragging up and to the right so that I can just grab, or I can grab anything that the lines touch. So I'm grabbing those 2 doors. I'm going to hit enter and give it a base point and move down something like 0.125. Done. Another way that you can modify the components of your drawing is to select that component. And you'll notice all these blue dots have been showing up. These blue dots are called grip points. And what you can do is you can select any of them, and it's going to, or I'm just hovering over it at this point, and it's going to give me a couple options. What you can do is you can click on this one in the midpoint of your line, and it's going to activate a stretch command. And it's going to stretch these 2 points beside it in, or whichever direction you choose to pull it. But I'm going to try to create a 0.125 gap between them, 1/8 inch gap between these 2 doors. So I want to pull this one so that they remain center. I'm going to pull this one 0.0625, 1/16. And then I'm going to pull this one 1/16. 0.625. And now I've got an 1/8 inch gap. It matches my gap to the carcass. So we're good. If you've got full overlay, we'll call this full overlay. So we're good. And now we've got a general section of the cabinet. We can do an offset command. OF is going to bring up offset. Offset's a command that will create parallel lines from your source object. So I'm going to offset and then specify the offset distance. We're going to just call it 0.75. Could be something else, but if you know your thickness, you can do that instead. So 0.75 offset, and select your original lines. And then you're going to select which side you want to offset to. So it creates a parallel line in reference to your original line. So I'm going to offset 0.75 this direction. And it showed up, it's almost on top of that grid line. So here's a good reason to turn off that grid. So there you go. I got another line offset exactly 0.75. So you can do the same thing with a copy, but offset will handle curved lines. So for a circle, I can offset that same, it'll also retain whatever you previously used for your offset distance. So it's going to offset 0.75 again. I can offset a circle, which you can't do with a copy. I mean, you could copy it and then change the radius, but offset's much faster. So that's the fastest way to do that. So also, I can continue offsetting. So offset distance is 0.75. So I've done one wall, but I also want to do my stretchers in the back. I want to do my left side, and I want to do any, let's say this is a subfront. So now I've got most of my parts. Now you can go through and click and drag all of these in, but it's not exactly the fastest. So we'll show you another way later. It's a bit faster, but for now, you can just drag these lines in using the grip points, and then you have a fairly accurate, we don't have any internal components, but we've got your doors, you've got a basic plan section of a cabinet. Even just in the few things we've learned in the past hour, you can create a plan section of a cabinet, and it's fully accurate. You can dimension any of these objects, and it will be fully accurate. And this part here will be the exact, if you used your specific thicknesses for left and right, this line extends between them, so it's going to be your full width for your subfront. These stretchers in the back, this line is going to give you the exact length for that stretcher. It's all drawn at full scale, so you can just read it and use that for your dimensions. So you've got everything you need to create even just a plan section. Okay, great. Looks good. Okay, rectangular. Okay. You can also add things like hatches and fills. So you can hit this drop down and add a hatch. You can, let's see, hatch. So let's add a hatch if you want to show that there's an internal material, probably for this part here. You want to add a little bit of fill to that. You can just click and it will insert a hatch. But if you double click on it, it'll bring up all of the hatch properties. You can change what it looks like. You can change, that is the pattern. The swatch is the pattern. So you can change the pattern. You could select objects. You can make it. You can change the properties about it. We don't quite have time to go into it, but this is how you add internal lines very quickly without having to, you can imagine drawing each of those individual lines. But if you change the scale on it, that's probably the one that we want to demonstrate. If you change the scale to 10, say OK, it's going to give you less lines. It's going to scale up the hatch. So now they can see that that is it's bisecting this part, if that's necessary for your drawings to make it clearer what's actually happening there, or to differentiate some parts from others. Maybe this is a finished end, and you want to be able to show, okay, this is different from your unfinished ends. So that is what you do, for instance. You could do that. You can also, they have hatches for brick and for other types of things like concrete, earth, if you wanted to use that. I think that's typical for earth, but you can select any of these and it comes in with those indications on it. So so hatches are beneficial for differentiating parts from other parts. Okay, sounds good. And yeah, there we go. We're good. Okay. All right, moving right along, we're going to move on to how to be precise. So let's do that one. Okay. All right, so we've already covered polar tracking. That's going to help you to have all of your angles be correct in relation to the other objects. You can use object snaps. So let's cover those in a little bit more detail. So that's 3D object snap. This is regular object snap. So endpoints, obviously the ends of any line. Midpoint is the middle of any line, center of a circle. That makes sense. Geometric circle or geometric center can give you a point within this. So that's the geometric center for this one. But if you had a line, you were trying to hit it, and you've got the geometric center. So that's another way we could have gotten that circle in the middle of this the rectangle. You could do that one. You might find it helpful, but I don't tend to use that one. A node is for things like text objects. So if you have a text object and then you put that in, so let's say text. Text objects have nodes as their width and height and distance. So you won't be able to snap to that node unless you use a node snap. You could put this text somewhere, but you can't move another object to that point of the text without a node on that. So that's where nodes come in handy. Quadrants are the 4 extents of a circle, like the top, bottom, left, and right. it's not a corner, but you can imagine if there was a square inside it, or a diamond, that would create a quadrant. Intersections are where two lines meet. Extension, that one could be helpful if you're trying to draw another line somewhere over here. So let me turn on extension and say if I want to put a line over here that is a continuation of this line, I've highlighted, and then I'm going to draw it over here. So let's put a line here and draw that line and go over here. So that is an intersection where that line would meet this line. That's also a parallel, perpendicular tracking, which is our next one. So extension, perpendicular. So if you went straight with a line, and where it would intersect another line is where it would give you a grip point, so, or a snap point. So line, that's perpendicular, that's perpendicular, that one is perpendicular. Even if I'm off a little bit, it'll show me where it is. Perpendicular, perpendicular, it's good. Okay, and then tangent is if you got a circle and you want a, I can just demonstrate real quick, circle, and then I've got a line, and I draw that line. I want this line to touch the circle but not cross the line. I just want it to intersect somewhere. I can go close to it, and that's not it. Come on, there it is. That's not the line I want. Let's draw a line, and then there it is. I can show where a line would be tangent. So yeah, so you have to look up tangent in a geometry textbook. It's a line that does not cross the circle but intersects with it instead. So best way I can describe that. So tangent, the nearest point on an object. Apparent intersection is the line that I used before. It went straight across, and then it would have intersected here. So that line, grab that one, and there. So that these two, if this line extended there, those both would intersect at the same point. And intersection, and then parallel is helpful if you're trying to draw a line. You could always use offset, but if you're trying to, for instance, text, I usually use mtext. It's just a little smarter. Then text. So if I wanted this text to rotate to be parallel with this line, all I have to do is come over to the line and show that it recognizes this object as wanting a parallel, and then rotate around until I get that snap. Where's that snap? Come on. It's not working with text object. Maybe I just have to use a line. So let's get another line, click here, and then get that parallel to show up. Then you can use that as a parallel, draw a parallel line also. So I have used it to the line object, text objects before, but you can also use it to align pretty much any object to an existing line. Okay, and so I'm going to turn off the ones that I don't typically need. So there we go. Those are all of your object snaps. The snaps will keep you honest. It will always snap to exactly that point. If you don't have them on, something like this can happen. If you hit L, and I've already turned it off, but if you try to make two lines connect, and then you zoom in on it, they're never really going to connect. But if you've done that, then you can turn it back on, select the end point, and snap to a point. And then you know for sure that those 2 points are at the exact same location. So we've got a couple of objects out here that we don't need anymore. I'm going to erase those. Get rid of that. Okay. All right. There's another feature called object snap tracking. which I've been using incidentally, but it's right here, object snap tracking. So if you've got a snap and you want to track a line similar to that, so for instance, I'm going to try and get the center point of this square again without using reference lines this time. So I'm going to draw a circle. It's just yet another way to do that. I'm going to highlight that midpoint, and now it's got a little plus sign on it. You can see that when I get close to it, it snaps a line off of that. So I could put any object that I want along this line without having to use a reference object of a line. So then I've got another point over here. I just hovered over it for a second and it gave me another plus sign. And now I've got two tracking points. I can put the line anywhere along this line and it's snapping to it. So you know that it is aligned to that existing point. Now I could even bring it down and find the intersection of both of those points. And now I've got a circle at the center of those two lines. So we're good to go. Okay. So once again, I'll put it at 6 inches, and now I've got a cutout in a shelf or something. Okay. So you can also, once again, verify that this is correct by hitting DI, selecting, and selecting. And it comes up with your delta X, delta Y, and I can see that it's in the correct spot. Okay. You can turn on and turn off these options using the function keys. F1 is help, and in the past I've even removed the F1 key from my keyboards to prevent me from hitting it, because sometimes it takes a little while for it to pop up, and usually I don't want to hit help. But if you do need help, you can hit F1. But you're going to be using the escape key a lot to cancel out commands. So if you want to you hit a line and you decide that you didn't actually want to use that point or hit an L, what you do to get out of it is hit escape. And that will always cancel a command and then won't finish it. It'll just get you back to where you were. So I use escape a lot to just get out of commands. But the F1 key is right next to it. So if you end up hitting F1 a lot and you don't really want to, you can helpful trick is to just remove the F1 key, and then you stop hitting that. Then F2 is to expand the history of your command line. It doesn't work on this interface, but if you have that, if you have the other command where it's docked down here, then you can hit F2 and it'll expand the history, and then you can click out of it and get away. F3 is your object snap. So you can see if you hover over this object snap F3, whether or not you want to snap to things is 3. Interesting. So it's not actually doing that for me. Maybe that this has changed. Let me skip the F1. It used to be that you could use the F commands, and it even says it here. F3 is to turn them on and off, but oh, you know what? My keyboard has shortcuts on it, so it's it's overriding the function keys. So on your keyboard, if you don't have the specialized keys for that, then yeah, I'm just using a fancy keyboard, and it's accessing the file commands instead of F3 for these. So for your keyboards, it's probably going to allow you to turn on and turn off all of these options. But for me, I'm more visual, so I can easily see which one this is and access the options to turn it off here. So if you like keyboard shortcuts and want to continue using F1 keys, you can do that, or you can just click them on and off down in this bottom. So at any point, if you find something is not shown in these commands down here, it's because of this customization area here. Yours probably doesn't include, I've turned on a few extras here. You can hit this customization, and this just selects which ones are showing. So for instance, let me turn on coordinates. I can see now what coordinates my cursor is at. So I might leave that on for the rest of the demo. But these just show or turn on and off which ones are showing. But then after that, you click here and you click them on or off, so that whether or not those options are selected. So there you go. That'll do that for that. Okay. All right. Moving right along to layers. So layers are a way of managing your drawing and revealing or hiding objects on your screen. It also determines, it's one of the ways that you can determine what color objects are showing. So if you've used graphics editing programs, you probably are familiar with layers, maybe like Photoshop. Photoshop uses layers to separate objects and or keep objects together, depending on which layer they're on. But if you think of it as layers of transparency paper and drawing a certain object on one layer of transparency paper, and then drawing another object on a different layer of transparency paper, and then laying them on top of each other. You can still see all of the objects. You can see all of them together, but then if you need to erase one entire transparency, it doesn't affect the other transparencies. So layers are a bit like that. You can either turn some of them off, like removing a set from your layers or your little, kind of like a flip book, I guess. But you can remove one page and then put it back in, and then you can see objects or turn them off. So we're going to do that with our little cabinet that we've done here. So let's go ahead and we'll put this circle on one of these default layers. We don't have any, so let's type in the layers command and create a few. So not layer states, layer, just layer command. It's going to bring up another toolbar. So in this drawing, the default one from AutoCAD, we don't have any layers. The only layer that we have is this 0 layer. The 0 layer is the default. It exists in pretty much every drawing that you'll ever go into. So just to be aware that that exists, and you typically don't want to draw things on it, but you could draw things on it as a placeholder when you want to move it to a different layer. So this is just one layer that you can draw on. So let's make a new layer. I should say the templates that you get from Microvellum, those are going to have all of the layers that you're going to need in order to draw objects using the Microvellum commands. But if you have a need for another layer, we are going to need a viewports layer, maybe just viewport layer. That's one that exists in your drawings, but maybe, but we're going to use it in just a bit later. So we're going to need that layer. We'll create a new layer. We'll say finished parts. Okay, and new layer, unfinished parts. And that's all we want for now. In your I tried to say that's fine, unfinished parts. There we go. Okay, so in this interface you can set the colors. So for viewports, let's use this light blue. You can use this light blue, color number 4, cyan. And then finished parts, let's call that a blue, dark blue. And then for unfinished parts, we can use this magenta. Okay, so now we've got a couple of layers, and we can move our objects around, put them on different parts, put different layers, just as a visual clue to somebody who, if they were just constructing it off of this drawing, then they would be able to tell, just based on the color of what you're working with, what color what material these parts should be made out of. So very quickly, you can come back to this main screen, select whatever you need to select, and hit this layers drop down in this section of the ribbon. Hit that drop down. Now we've got a list of all of our parts. So let's go with finished end, like I said earlier, for that one. All of the objects that I had selected have turned blue. So let's do the same for all of these parts. Let's call these unfinished. And then the doors and subfront are going to be finished parts. We could designate this backside as unfinished. So let's say unfinished. And that one's also interior, so let's say unfinished as well. So if, let's do the backside of the doors. These doors are rectangles. So in order to turn them into lines so that we can modify the properties individually, what we'd have to do is explode them. So that turns a rectangle with all of its properties into lines. So explode, it's a modified command that we're going to get into a little bit later. But we'll do that to both doors. Now you can see I can select these lines individually. So I'm selecting those, and I'm going to change them to unfinished parts because they're on the inside. So there you go. So that's a basic demonstration of layers. You can have them, you can create them, change colors, and you could also change which line types they are. So if, for instance, you wanted all of your finished parts to, instead of having a continuous line, you wanted it to be a dashed line or something else, you could load in the new line types and put those in there. So in this template, they don't have any extras loaded. So we won't bother with that, but you can add hidden lines, dash dots, lots of others. Same thing for unfinished. You can do this to all of the lines that are on that layer all at once. So that's why having things on different layers are helpful. Also, if at any point you want to isolate a specific layer, you could turn on or off the finished parts, for instance. So everything on that finished parts layer just disappeared. It's not gone. I haven't erased it or anything. I just turned it off, just like this light bulb. Using this light bulb in the drop-down, or you could use the light bulb in this interface. So layers on or off, you can see here it's on or off everywhere, or you can freeze. They're slightly different, so I'm gonna show that in later when we're in Paperspace. So you can group objects by their location or function or any other property that you want the layers to depict in your drawings. So they'll come in with the different colors, and our plot styles that we are going to introduce later also use those colors to show what line weight they're going to use when they're plotted. When they're printed off from your printer, that's what line weight they're going to use. Is the darker the line, pretty much the darker the line, the darker the line is going to be, sorry, the darker the color, the darker the line is going to be on your print. So that's generally how that works. Okay, so yep, you can just by moving an object to another layer, you can change its properties. Okay, there you go. Very good, very good. So for complex drawings, you're going to have hundreds of layers maybe, and you can group them. You can put them in different categories, turn them on or off depending on which category they're in. So it's it's a very handy interface and a way of sectioning your objects, just your AutoCAD objects at this point, but Microvellum uses layers also to their fullest extent to section off 3D objects as well as 2D objects. Okay, very good. All right, okay. Got it. Okay, and layer states or layers in general are a way to manage your drafting standards, because once your company has established standards and you want everybody to use those standards, you don't have to have everybody specifically indicating which lines are dashed lines and which lines are solid lines, you can use your layer properties manager to set that in your template. And then you just tell them to say, put all of your finished ends on the finished parts layer, and then all of then from then on, they're always blue and they're always continuous or dashed or however you set it up. So it's just a way of maintaining standards. Okay, very good. Okay, moving on to our next subject. We're looking at the properties interface. So thank you for asking before how to bring that up. You can type in properties to bring that up, or if you have something selected, right click. Sorry, not selected. Right click. That's funny. Used to. Yeah, there it is. If you have something selected and you hit right click, you can get to properties. So you can set that property there and show any of the properties about an object. So there are many intricate details that go into every object in your drawing. So the point of origin and the endpoint are all that you specify to AutoCAD, but it by default puts in a lot of other properties. Like so for instance, if I drew a line right now, you'll see it's on layer 0. You can see that layer 0. But if I change my current layer to finished parts and draw another line, it is then by default on the finished parts layer. So the properties interface is where you can see all of that, all of the options that it is setting, all of the properties that it's setting about these objects by default. So if you look at the properties, it's coming in because it's on the finished parts layer, it's blue. But that's only because the property for the color is set to inherit that property from the layer. If I, for instance, want to override that, I could still have something on the finished parts layer, but have it as a different color. Any of these colors, or go to select color, and I can select one from the color wheel. And yeah, so the color palette or color books or true color, however you'd like to do that. So that's in the properties. You can change it in this other properties menu in the actual ribbon. So you can change which layer it's on. You can change what color it is, either by layer or by any other, just any specific definition. You can change the line type for it. You can change the scale. You can change the line weight for it, whether it's transparent or not. If it has a hyperlink, if it's a text object, that's probably more likely. Then if you were doing a 3D object and wanted this to have a material, you could specify a material. And then all of these geometric points are all of the points that it takes into consideration when it's trying to display this object. So the start X, the start Y, that makes sense. We gave it that. We specified those. But the start Z, we haven't even messed with Z yet. So it's by default going, when you're in a top view, it's using a Z of 0. Then we specified again the end X, the end Y, and then it's taking the end Z again. But then it's got a couple of readouts for delta X, delta Y, and delta Z. So these readouts, for instance, delta X is how far in the X-axis the entire line spans. So delta X is 15, a little bit more than 15, and the length is the same as the delta X because there's nothing in Y, and then the angle is 0. So you can not only view the properties of an object, but you can also modify them. So say I wanted this to be a little bit more exact. I wanted this at exactly 64 and 71. Okay. Then I know I want some length on it, so I'm gonna specify an end X of 80. But my Y shouldn't change, so I'm gonna change that to 71. Okay. Now I've got a much better whole numbers for 64, 71, 80, 71, and length is exactly 16 instead of having a much greater decimal value. But my angle is still 0. So to demonstrate the angle, I can change my Y to let's try 75. And now I have an angle, and you can see the delta x and the delta y are whole numbers, but the length is going to be an odd number. So if you're checking the lengths of parts, you're going to want the, well, depends on what you're doing, but sometimes you're going to want the length to be a whole number, and you don't care what the delta x and the delta y are, but other times you're going to want your delta x and your delta y to be the whole numbers, but then you don't really care what the length is. You're just going to cut it to approximately that length or exactly that length if it's your CNC. So when you're checking lengths on something like a nest drawing, you can use this interface to see exactly what it's doing. So for a rectangle, I'm going to have to draw a new rectangle because I got rid of mine. You can do a couple of, there's other properties in it. So I want to show you those because there's mostly rectangles on a nest drawing. So that would be beneficial to you, is to know that you can see vertexes along any rectangle. So for your cutout parts on your nest drawing, you can show current vertex 0, or sorry, 1. But if you did this on a nest drawing, you could scroll through, same as I'm doing now, and see all of the points where your bit is going to change direction. So the current vertex is where your start point, and then it's going to travel around the part in this direction. And it's just going to move from vertex to vertex. So you can double check your part borders by going through the current vertexes and see every point where it stops and every point where it turns. You can also do edits on this line. If you saw earlier when you hover, you got the option to add vertex or convert to arc. I'm going to add a vertex over here, and then I'm going to convert this one to an arc and draw that there. Okay, so now I've got something that's not a rectangle, but I'm going to go through the vertexes, and now I can see how this bit is going to travel around. So for instance, those are reasons that you could, and I recommend having the properties dialog open. Not necessarily showing all the time, but easily accessed. So there you go. So that is some of the very helpful parts about the properties. There's also a quick access or quick properties. I've had some drafters complain about how long it takes sometimes for that to pop up. Let me see. Quick properties. And this is just a custom subset of the properties that show here. You can get them to automatically pop up and show up somewhere on the screen. So I'm going to settings. I want this always on. So I went into settings, and I'm just going to show you that you can have this on all the time. I definitely don't want it to be on my cursor. I want it to be a static position up here on the right. So if I highlight something, it'll look up the properties and pop it up. So there you go. Now I see these, and you can customize which properties are showing. So if you don't like having to come over here to the flyout, you could select something and have it automatically pop up, and then you could see these options. You can right click and change the settings about it. Is it customize? That's what it is. So you can customize and have it show specific properties. This is a very useful one about whether or not it's closed. That causes a lot of issues when you're trying to work with geometry. So this object, whenever I select a polyline, it's going to show me these options or these properties about that object. So you can have these on or off for any of these types of objects. You can select which properties you want to show, and then you don't have this flyout that has all of the options. You instead have an automatic pop-up that gives you the specific options that you're looking for. Okay, so I can have that on, or if you don't particularly care for it, you can turn it off. That's in the drafting settings. So if you select an object, right-click, and show quick properties, then you can have that on. Did not hit OK. There we go. Or you can select something and then say just, oh, well, I want to see the quick properties this time. Okay, another very useful function is an easier way to, I use it typically to assign layer states, or you can use it for other matching of properties, and it's called match properties. So you can type in MA, and it'll bring up the command match properties. So I want to match prop, and it'll ask you for a source object. So this is the object that you're going to use, and you're going to take the properties from this one and apply those properties to another object. So if I wanted to return all of these to the 0 layer, I can easily select that, and that, and that, and that. This matches all of the properties, so if I had changed anything other than the layer, it would also match those properties to the object that I selected to start with. Now, I didn't leave myself a source object, so I'm going to switch this one back to unfinished parts. You do have to have a source object, so MA, and then select the source object. Now, I don't, for the purposes of demonstrating something we talked about earlier, I may find it difficult, maybe I'm zoomed out further, I may find it difficult to find that line without hitting anything else. So I'm going to use the click and drag to the right, or it's not click and drag, click and, yeah, I'm going to drag. I'm not going to click and hold. But you'll notice now that only when I'm selecting an entire object does it change color and show me what's going to happen if I confirm that. So if I go and move it to the left, it's going to select everything that touches that dotted line. But if I click and drag to the right, it's only going to select that one line that I was actually looking for. So this one's a little more difficult. I could zoom in and click between these two lines and then drag to the right and just get those two lines. So just a demonstration of something we talked about a little earlier. In some cases, that's going to be critical for you to just select the things that you're looking for. Okay, there you go. Click and drag to the right. Good. Okay, match properties. So it's match prop, or MA is how you get that. Source object and then the destination objects. Same thing for line types. Let me add a couple line types so that we can demonstrate this. Other, load. If your drawing has line types already, then you can skip this step. But if it doesn't, what I did, I went to this drop down for line type, and I hit other. And as you can see, the only options in this drawing one are the bilayer, biblock, and continuous, which are all continuous technically. I'm going to hit load, and you'll see all of the options that you have. So the more of these that you have in your drawing, the longer it takes to load the drawing, and the longer it takes the longer the list is here. So typically you only want the ones that you need. So I got dash dot, dashed, don't need divide, hidden, that one's pretty helpful. Zigzag is kind of fun, and also the batting shows you what you can do with line types. So say OK. Now I've got all of these line types available. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to change this one and show you a couple of the different options. You can do batting, which if it was at a greater scale would probably show you better. You can draw one line. Instead of having to draw each and every one of these objects and all of these curves and copy it over and over and over and over, you can draw one line and have it as a specific line type, and it will draw all of that for you. Dash dot is dashes and dots. Maybe kind of hard to see the dots, but there's dots in between each of these lines. And when you're in paper space, you probably see it better, but there's one right inside of there. Okay, then moving right along to hidden is just dashes. And zigzag gives you a zigzag line. So if those are helpful in any of your drawings to depict maybe a fence or something else, maybe you're actually drawing batting in a wall, you can put that in very easily. Okay, very good. Yeah. Okay, so line types. That's you can create your own custom line types, but we aren't covering that as part of our our topics today. Okay, I know we mentioned that line weights are overridden by our plot style settings, so we're going to talk about those later. But if you wanted to assign a line weight so that you could see it in the drawing, you would hit this drop down and you can assign different line weights. So I'm not currently showing line weights. That's an option in here, line weight. So I've turned on to be able to see line weights now. So if you wanted to be able to see it, I typically don't have that on because I want to see just the straight lines, and since my plot styles determine that anyway, and I use layer states to manage this, the assignments for color and for line weight, I just use color to show myself what line weight it is. But if you choose to do it a different way, you can view your line weights, and then you can actually see what your drawing is going to print without having to do a print preview, which is the way that I do it, but may not be the way that you choose to. So I'm going to turn that one back off. So that's LW display, and you can turn it on or off. And so then that's a good illustration of if I use match properties. I could match properties for this to all of the interior parts, and they would now have that line weight. Even though it's not a property of the layer, they now have that property because I matched that property from this object that had that property of a 0.5 millimeter line weight. All right. So yeah, generally you want that off, but in cases where you need it or you want to see it, you can turn it on there. Okay, moving right along, we can go on to modifying. So we've covered a little bit of this already just because it was necessary in order to demonstrate some things. But modifying tools are going to be very essential in your drafting. I should mention that you're not going to want to use any of these tools on Microvellum objects. You're only going to use them on AutoCAD objects. So when Microvellum draws something in the drawing, you can copy it and explode it and make modifications to it, but you don't necessarily, you wouldn't want to do that and then hit redraw, because if you redraw it, what Microvellum does is erases the objects that it used previously, the objects that it drew previously, and then it'll redraw it in the drawing brand new, because it does all brand new calculations to show what it should look like. So it erases the existing objects, and then it puts brand new objects in the drawing. So if you use any of these tools that I'm going to show you right now to modify them, your work will get lost, and it will just redraw a brand new copy of whatever it was that it was depicting, say an elevation or a section. If you make a copy of it, then it's saved, but if you redraw it, it'll erase your work. So just use the tools that I'm going to show you on objects that you've created using the commands that I've shown you just now. So anything that we've covered today is fine. Okay, so the first one is something that we've talked about a little bit, but we want to make sure that you know how to get to it. It's the erase command. You can clean up your drawings, get rid of anything that's not needed anymore by hitting this erase button. Obviously it's a pencil with an eraser, or you can hit E, and that'll activate the erase command. And you can highlight anything you want. Same highlight selection options. You can drag to the right, or you can get anything with the drag to the left. So I've selected multiple objects and hit enter, and now they're gone. So that's erase. And okay, so right, again, we're going to get into move and copy. So if you wanted to move this object, you hit M, or you can go up here to the one that's titled move, and you can select and move. And so you select a base point, and I've shown you two different ways to move objects. You can select a base point that's on the object if you want to move something relative to itself. So the center point, I definitely want this center point to be on this object. And so I'm going to click on the object and then on the reference point, the location that I want to move it to. But if you're moving an object and it's not in reference to a point and moving that point to another point, what you can do is use the move command, select the object, and then hit enter. But the base point, I want to use some base point that's way off in space, somewhere that is not going to interfere with anything else. Because if I say I want to move this over to the right, again, at 12 inches, I could click here. But then when I move over those 12 inches, I'm going to start getting snap points along my drawing. So that's going to interfere with my placement of this at the exact point where I want it, because I might accidentally hit this point or hit this grip point, or sorry, snap point, or some other snap point, and it's going to interfere with my location. It applies much more to busier drawings, but in this case, still, you can use the move command and then click somewhere out here where I can move for days over this direction, and I'm not going to run into anything. And it just makes it a whole lot clearer because I'm moving over, and I just want to move it over 12 inches. So enter. It's moved. And now I know that I didn't accidentally click on something else. It didn't snap to another point. For instance, well, this line only has these points, so that's fine. But if I was trying to move this direction, but it accidentally grabbed that point, it could move 12 inches in this direction. And it would be along the line toward that grip point, but maybe I was trying to do something else. So I'm going to move that back, and it's right where we wanted it to be. Okay, then copy. Copy is very similar to move. You select an object, and then you select a base point. If I know that I want to put this back at the center point here, I can grab a point and grab a point. Or if I want to copy and I know I want to put it 12 inches up this way, then I'm going to, again, put a point in space and say 12 inches up that way. There we go. Got a snowman. Okay, there we go. All right. So yeah, so sometimes you want to move a distance, sometimes you want to move a point to a point. Okay, very good. Okay, so yeah, so that's a distance method and the 2 points method. Now you can make, I'm going to bring my objects back. You can make multiple copies. So I'm going to copy this object, let's say 50 inches this time. Then I'm going to copy, and I'm going to copy a relative point here, the center of this circle. So say I want to have circles every 50 inches, continuing on a couple times over this direction. I want to copy this object over 50 inches. There's other ways to do this, but for this instance, I'm going to say this one is already 50 inches away from the other. So I'm going to select this and have a base point here. That's the center of this circle. Now I'm going to use this base point, which I know is 50 inches away from this base point. And where's the circle? Center of my circle is not snapping. Center. Come on. Okay, so copy, and I'm going to select the center of this circle. And now I'm going to select the center of this circle. Now I've got another circle that's 50 inches away from this circle. So now I can go further out and hit the center of the next circle and the center of the next circle. And notice I'm just hovering about the perimeter of this circle, and that's how it brings up the circle center point, the grip point, or the snap point, sorry. So I'm just progressively getting further and further away. Now if I wanted to go a little bit faster, at some point I can copy multiples, grab this center point. Now I've got 6 of them, and I can do the same thing, the end point, going over, another 6. Now I've got a lot of circles, and it's faster. And then you could do that as many times as you want, or in any, however, select as many as you want to have drop in. So you're just making copies. You do the same thing, copy it up, now I'm going to start making a grid of them, and yeah, they're duplicating quite quickly. So let's that was only 10. I meant to do 100, but that's there you go. So now we got a lot of 2-tier snowmen. Okay. All right. So there's another way that you can do this. I don't use this very often, but you can. Let's see mode, multiple. Yeah. So there's an array command that you can do where you can have one source object. So let's do something up here, 200 inches above where it was, and do an array. And I'm going to select these two objects. Okay, so those are going to be my source objects. It's going to use these two, and it's going to ask me if I want to copy these on a path, on a rectangle, or on a polar. So polar is going to do a circle. Let's just demonstrate each of them. So rectangular. Now I've got options down here. Base point, I could change my base point. I can count, do certain spacing, change my spacing. I do want to change my spacing. It's going to ask distance between columns, which columns are the vertical copies. So for that, we want to go back to 50. And then for my vertical distance between rows is going to be another 50. There you go. All right. So I pretty much got those all where I want them. Now, this array command, it keeps all of these associated. So this copy command has all of them separated out as individual parts. But this one keeps them all as one group. So this is very nice if you want to change the number of them. So this is changing the number of columns. Now I only have 6. But if I wanted to drag that out, now I have a lot. And if you drag them up, same thing, change the number of rows. So you can see how that's faster than copy, and it's more flexible if you have a specified distance that you want between them, or if you just want to create a lot of them very quickly. At this point, you could duplicate this, and then you can use the explode command. Explode. And select these objects, and they'll explode and turn into individual objects. So now they're individual snowmen. Just like this one. So it could be a faster way to do something, but if you find that that's or whichever, if you're just copying once, then copy obviously is going to be faster. But if you're copying a large array of parts, then you could use an array command. And if I go back to when it was an array, it remains flexible, and you can change the size of it very quickly. Okay, very good. Okay, sounds good. We've also covered the offset command, but just as a review, because we're in that section now, offset is going to create a parallel line to your source object. So I'm going to offset 0.75, and it's going to create another circle 0.75 off of that. So it's great for doing double line prints for like house plans, or for creating thicknesses of cabinetry parts. And you can continue doing that as many times as you need. You know what? I forgot to finish talking about the other options for an array command. Sometimes they can be very helpful. So there's you can array along a path, so you'd need a line for that. But source object, path, yeah, you want a curve, don't you? Okay, so I want to change this into a, let's just do a curve. So I'm going to do an arc and give it center point, curve. Okay, and then array that, and along the path, and select the path. So now I've got an array along this path. There's, if you did that manually, it would be difficult, and but if you do this with the array command, you can space things out quite easily. So now I have 4 of these circles along that arc. You could do something similar. I'm going to erase, I'll leave that up, and then copy this out. Copy that up 50, and now I'll demonstrate using the polar array. So let me put another circle. It's very similar to what we just did with the little array along an arc path, but you can select an object, select polar, and then you can grab a center point of the array. So it's going to go around this circle, and because I've set, or because by default it was set to fill the angle, which was a 360 angle, it filled it with a specific number of items. So if you want to change the number of items, currently it's 6. If you change that to 5, it'll equally space those items around the circle that the radius describes. So you can do, you can fill by angle, which it's filling a 360 angle, or you can set like an angle between. So I want every circle at 45 degrees between them. And because we set it to 5 circles, it's going to do 45s until those 5 circles are complete. Okay. You can change your base point if you wanted to have a different base point somewhere else. You can change the number of items, and you can change that to, let's say, 10. Now I've got a lot of them, and there you go. So that's, you can array around a polar object, and so it's using the polar description of going around a circle. So that could be very helpful. Got hair on my snowman now. Okay, so good to go. I like that. All right, very good. Okay, very good. And yep, so offset, array. All right, moving on to trim and extend. This is the situation that I was talking about where you could more easily lengthen or shorten lines. So let's draw another square, and let's do another 24 by 24 and offset 0.75 and offset in. Okay, so let's explode these again. So that's a basic layout for any cabinet. It's pretty standard, but I want to show, let me change all of these objects also to white so it's a little easier for you to see. Okay, so if I wanted to change this and make it look more like actual cabinet parts that bypass each other instead of just like maybe they're mitered, I don't know, they're magically glued together or something. So I want to extend and show which parts bypass the others. I can use the EX extend. I think, is it EX? Yeah, EX is the extend command. So EX will extend any objects. So it's asking me now to select the boundary edges. So if I want to extend this line to meet this line, I want to use this line as the boundary and say enter, and then extend this line to meet it. But it won't extend to anything else because I didn't select anything else as the boundary. So if you keep in mind, that's the basic principle. You're extending a line to the boundary that you have previously specified, then that's the basic concept of this extend command. Now, the more powerful way to use it is to extend and select all. So I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to select all. Now I can use anything in the drawing as a border. So now I'm going to extend to that one, going to extend that one, and that one. I know these are all backward, but I'm going to fix it with the next command. So the power of using that is that I didn't have to go through and select all of my borders. But the danger is that you could accidentally click this line, and now it extends to something way further away, and I did not want to do that. So I can undo and get rid of that line. So just to be aware, it actually doesn't extend to anything you can't see. So you have to be able to see it in order for that to work. But also, if you're working with little intricate details on something, you can select just the lines that you want to be able to extend it with. Also, if I did offset a couple more times, and say I wanted to extend this line to reach that line, it'd be a little annoying to extend and extend, extend, extend. The way you can get around that is by also, once again, selectively selecting your boundary. So I want to go straight to this one without ignoring the other two. EX. And it'll now go straight to it. So you can bypass those extra lines. Trim is the next command. So let's use this as an example. It's very similar, but it does the opposite. So trim, and it's going to ask me for boundaries. I want to trim this back to here. Trim. Now it cut that line to where they're intersecting. So I'm going to do the same thing, but just clean up the ones that I know are wrong. Wrong if this is the front of the cabinet is what I'm thinking. So trim those. And so now it's back to where we started. But I'm going to show you another feature of the trim commands, and trim and extend actually. You can reverse which command you're using. Because they're so similar, they're just inverted of each other. You can use one and then hold a button to get it to convert to the other. So for instance, say I'm trimming and I select all. I can hold Shift and it will extend instead of trim. So let me hold Shift, and now that line extended. But if I stop holding Shift, I can then click and it'll go back to trim. So I want to extend these lines to meet there. I've selected all once again. That's why I didn't have to go through and individually click on those. But for instance, say if I accidentally extended that, I hold Shift and that would extend it. But then I let go of Shift and that allows me to trim it. So helpful pro tip, you can hold Shift and it switches from a trim to an extend, or from an extend to a trim. And you can easily do the same thing and faster than clicking and dragging those things out. So now let's use the match property key command to match these properties. That's the internal line there, and one more. That guy, match properties. I hit enter to cancel or to finish the command, and then I hit enter again, or spacebar. Those are interchangeable. I hit spacebar again to reactivate the match properties command. So match properties, and I'm going to hit this blue line because now I want to do my finish surfaces, and select those two. Done. Pretty quick way of duplicating our work from earlier. So yeah, so that's trim and extend, and you can select all, or you can trim all. So let me demonstrate another helpful feature. You can select all these. Okay, so now I'm going to extend, but instead of hitting each of these lines individually, I'm going to extend these to here. What you can do is use a selection, and now whenever you hit these, it's going to extend those. So whichever ones I have selected, they get extended. Whichever ones I haven't, they don't. You can also, so you can use a window selection to extend a lot of lines. If you know all of these need to get to here. Tripping over my fingers. Okay, so extend this to there. I think I extruded these. It's no longer. Okay, let me just undo and redo. Okay. Okay, and extend. There we go. That's better. So you can do that. And then also this is another instance where guiding lines are helpful. So I'm just going to do a line across these, and then I can trim along that line to get these at back to an angle and get them off that cabinet. So there you go. So trim and extend, very helpful commands. It helps because you can start with a line that you already know is on a good axis and is the length that you need. Yeah, so then you offset, and then you want to extend something to go all the way to another object, get it to intersect, and then you know that you've got a firm connection between these two objects. If you click and drag, it works, but you might accidentally grab the wrong location. So you just want to, yeah, trim and extend are the best ways to go when you're trying to get objects to intersect. Okay. Yeah, I sorry about the blue. I did realize that a bit later. I can demonstrate how you can easily change that. So let's just go with how about a lighter blue? There you go. Thanks for that. Yeah, so now we've got everything that was on that layers on a nice lighter blue and a good demo of why it's good to use that. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Another one of my favorites is mirror. So once again, we will make another rectangle and drag that out to the center point here, somewhere around here. Okay, got it. Drag down for 0.75. Now I've got a door. But what I'm going to do before drawing another door is get this door to be perfect. It's going to be exactly where I want it and exactly the size that I want it. So I'm going to move this down 0.125, and then I'm going to stretch this in that 16.065. Okay, so now I've got one door that's exactly the way I want it, and to save myself time and not have to duplicate that on another door, I'm going to make what's similar to a copy, but I'm going to actually mirror it. So if you think of mirror command is MI, or you can find it here on the toolbar. The mirror command, you can select objects, hit enter, and then select the points to create the mirror line. So imagine that I'm putting a mirror between this object and the object that I'm creating. So there's a straight line. This is going to be the mirror line, and on the opposite side is my new object. So I clicked and it disappeared, and I'm like, where'd it go? But if you look down here, erase source objects. If you find something is on the left side and you need it on the right side, you can easily mirror something to an opposite side, and that will not only move it, but also reverse it. So this option, erase source objects, comes up. Generally you're going to say no, but if you know you want to mirror something and you don't want it to be on that side, then you can hit yes. So for no, it gives me my exact door. Gives me my door on the exact opposite side, and it's all aligned and perfect, and I like it. So that is the mirror command. Say, for instance, you were creating like a blind panel cabinet, or drawing a section, freehand drawing a section of a blind cabinet, and you drew it left, but then you realize that, oh, that's supposed to be right. You can mirror the entire cabinet along a line, and now you've got a duplicate. And so I'm not going to erase the source objects this time, just to show you. You could say yes in that case, and it would erase all of these objects and just keep these objects. So now you've got one of each, a left and a right version of that drawing. Okay. All right. Okay. Our next one is stretch. So very helpful. Continue using the same example, but say field dimensions have changed for this drawing, and so you want to change this. You want to either make the door bigger or smaller. It's very similar to the command we use to stretch these parts out. It's stretching these two grip points. So you want to keep that in mind, what you're actually stretching. So stretch can be used as a move command, as well as similar to an extend command. It will lengthen lines. So I'm going to hit S, and that will bring up the stretch command. Now, let me show you again these objects' grip points. So you can see all of these objects have endpoints in these locations. So I'm going to stretch, and I want to make sure my stretch includes those grip points because those are the objects that I want to stretch. So if I window those objects with a stretch command, you notice I'm windowing those grip points. Midpoints don't matter so much. Those aren't helping define these lines. They just show you where the midpoint is. So those ones don't matter so much. But I'm windowing the endpoints or start points, depending on which you're talking about. But I'm going to select, and I'm going to drag out, and that'll make it longer. Or I can stretch in, and it's going to make it shorter. So you can stretch in and then type in the command for how much you want it to move. So for instance, 5 inches. And then you could do the same thing, window those grip points and move them out 5 to return it back to where it was. So you can select some, notice that I selected the grip points for all of these lines, or so all of the grip points for these 2 lines, and they maintained their length in relation to everything. But I only grabbed the end point or the start point for these 2 lines, one of those points, so I grabbed the start point for these lines and was able to lengthen them because I was dragging this point out away from the other point. So depending on which grip points you grab, it's going to lengthen or shorten those lines. So if I wanted to, for instance, stretch part of this and create an angle, I'm going to use that stretch command again, grab just the back section and drag it out. So you can see how, keeping in mind which grip points you're going to be pulling, it will definitely make a difference in your drawing. Also, let me move this over 5. Also, these 2 lines here, these 2 points stayed at exactly the same location. So if I do a dimension, this is still going to be 0.75. But the change in angle reduced the thickness of this material that I was depicting. So if I select that and select the perpendicular, it's no longer 0.75. So when you're doing your drawing and you stretch something at an angle, you want to make sure that that either stays the way you want it or you recognize it. For this case, I would just erase this and then offset another line at 0.75 and grab that and offset in, and now I've got an angle. I can trim, and I'm going to select all objects, and I'm going to trim that, and then I'm going to hold shift and extend that and extend that. So now I have an angled cabinet, or a section, or a plan section of an angled cabinet. I can get dimensions off of this length of this part. I wouldn't necessarily want to use that one because I do still want the angle, but the length of this line plus the extra length on this for the angle would give you the length for that part. So it's a little over 24.5. So you can use the stretch command to create objects that are lengthened on one part, or extend, or make field modifications, or change dimensions. Okay, so our next command is a fillet command. Let's draw another rectangle. Let's let's go ahead and use what we've learned so far to offset and create a countertop for. Let's move these together. I'm going to move these together and pretend that they're going to become a section of section of cabinets. So move this over to here. And now notice there's something amiss here. So let's move this over closer to 65 and no longer have full overlay, closer to 65. There we go. Okay, so now we got at least some gap between those 2 doors, and it just makes me happy. So so now let's create a countertop for these cabinets. So say they actually do want an angle on this countertop or on the countertop to match this cabinet. It's not just going in to match a wall or something. And then we want to also have an overhang on this side. We can use what we've learned so far to offset. You could use a copy command to do this as well, but offset is going to give you options to select multiple lines. So let's offset on the finished end 0.625 on this finish. I think yeah, I should have had this as a finished end, but in any case, it's not. So then also here, and 1.5 off the front. Or you can use whatever dimensions you prefer. So we do need another layer for countertops. So let's create another layer. So countertops. Okay, and pick something. Let's go with, no, we've already got a magenta, so let's go with a lighter green. Okay, it's going to be a little annoying, but yeah, so a little big color there. Okay, so now we can select the lines we just created. Change that to a countertops layer. And then it depends on your drafting style whether you want an additional line here or if you just want other lines coming off here and here. But depending on your drawing style, you might want a line on top of those, or you can have an extra line behind it so that they don't overlap. But for this instance, I'm going to show you what that looks like if you put one line across it. So I'm going to match properties to get this to be a green line as well. Now I'm going to use the fillet command for both cases, whether for two instances. There's two things that are very helpful. You can use the fillet command to make things join. It's kind of a way to do extend and trim at the same time. So I'm going to use this fillet to demonstrate that. So fillet, and the radius is 0, just for this instance. So I'm going to select this line, and then I'm going to select the line that I want it to intersect. Oh, come on, do that line. There we go, got it. Now I'm going to give it the line that I want it to intersect with. And notice this line stops here, and this line stops a little bit short of being all the way to the edge. But when I highlight this one, they'll both extend to meet each other. So now I've got that line going all the way across, and here's another good example of needing to change the draw order to bring to front. And regenerate. Nope. Come on, bring it to front. Okay, sometimes AutoCAD has a little issue with that, so try it the opposite way to send it back. Yeah, I don't know. It's when I zoom in, it works. There it goes. Okay, now it's working. Yeah, so try it both ways, bringing to front and sending to back, and it'll usually resolve itself. So now I'm going to do the fillet command again. So you saw it extend 2 lines. So now let's move this line over here. Move this line over here. You can use the fillet command with 0 radius to bring these 2 lines together. So that's like a trim command. So that was an extend, this was a trim, and then if you have a situation like this as well, it can do one of each. So use the fillet command, grab this, and it will extend this line whilst also trimming this line to get them to intersect at that same point. So it's a helpful command when you've got lines that you need to touch but aren't currently doing that. So let's imagine these are just the only 2 cabinets that are coming on this countertop, and we want to put a radius corner on here. Fillet is also the command for that. So fillet, you can then add a radius. So let's do something nice to keep from hurting people. 1.5. So I'm going to put a 1.5 radius on this corner between that line and that line. Oh, sorry. Did I hit 1.5? That's not 1.5. Fillet radius 1.5. Should be 1.5 inches. There we go. That's better. Must have not specified that correctly. Okay. So fillet radius 1.5. Now, if you select this object and check the properties of it, you'll notice the radius of that curve is 1.5. And it perfectly flushes up with the 2 lines that went into it. So that's a great way to add curves to any of your countertops or parts that you're adding through the nest or in any case, anywhere. And you can do the same thing with 90-degree corners, and you got that. A similar command is chamfer, but instead of a radius, it's going to put a chamfer on the corner. So I'm going to do current chamfer distance is that. So let's do distance to change the distance of the chamfer. Do 1.5 and 1.5. And hit that line and this line. And now I've got a chamfered corner just to knock the edge off of that. So that could be faster than drawing an additional line at an angle and then moving it in 1.5 and moving it up 1.5. So yeah, so that's a great place to put that, to use that command. You could also use the chamfer command to do a 0 distance, 0, 0, and then create a fillet. Or sorry, and then do the same thing as we were doing with the fillet to make those 2 lines extend and meet. But typically I see people using the fillet command for that, and it'll do the extend and trim at the same time. Very good. Okay, we've covered the explode command to separate objects that are grouped together. So that's helpful if you wanted to change the materials on a rectangle, but also it will do things like explode this array and turn all of those into individual objects, as we demonstrated also earlier. So that's another modify command that is very helpful if you want to separate objects that are grouped together. Okay, another useful command. What we did here was called a polyline. Anytime you start with a rectangle command and lines are grouped together like this is technically a polyline object. You can see here it's a polyline, whereas the regular lines that are not grouped together are just called lines. Polylines are especially helpful in some cases because they stay together. And you can create one freehand by hitting PL. So that's a polyline. And you can click, and then wherever you click around the screen, it's going to make one contiguous line. And then once again, you can use the explode command to turn those into separate lines. But if you wanted one continuous line that you could select all at the same time, then you could have a polyline. That's probably the best thing to do for you. Typically, I'll have my countertops be a polyline, and that allows me to select the entire countertop all at one time instead of having to zoom in and grab different pieces of the countertop at all the times. So you can change a regular line. Like obviously you can, I just said you can explode a polyline to change it into regular lines, but you can also use p-edit to change a regular line into a polyline. So p-edit, select polyline, or you select a regular line and it'll ask you to turn it into one. Say yes. Then what you can do is join. You then select what lines you want to connect to that polyline. So go ahead and hit all these and these. Done. Okay, it added 4 segments to the polyline. So 1, 2, 3, and then this arc was a 4th. Okay, now you hit that and you get all of it all at the same time. So that's very helpful. I tend to use that because I copy out countertop drawings, or you can use it for anything you want, but but still it's helpful. And yeah, so good to go. Then if you, another helpful thing about a polyline is if you fillet radius 1.5, and I put this curve back on here, and it's going to maintain these points. So it deals with polylines a little bit different than it does with regular lines. Yeah, just got a question about this exactly. So if you have polylines and you fillet the two points, that creates the arc between them. But if you fillet with a 0 radius, previously with the regular lines, I ended up with an extra arc here. But if you fillet between 2 points on a polyline, it will eliminate that arc as well. So it just tracks it, and it knows that, oh, you probably want to get rid of that fillet, and it doesn't exist anywhere. There's not extra points or any junk or gibberish in this point here. It just eliminates that vertex and puts those two at a coincidental location. So also, that's another way to add points to a polyline. If I say I want that here, this is a polyline, that's a regular line. If I fillet the two of these with a 0 or even with a curve, it will join the polyline to the regular line. So that's a subtle difference, a slight difference between the way they interact. If you tried to, let me see, I don't actually know if this, oh, you know what, it's going to eliminate that section. If you fillet between these two, it cuts the line wherever the start point for that line was. So you want to be careful when filleting between entities, whether it's a polyline or a regular line, because it does react differently. Okay, so erase that. The one thing to keep in mind about polylines is that they do have a start point. Even though it's a continuous line, they do have a start point. And if you go into properties and check the current vertex, you'll see where that start point is. And you'll go around. And this polyline actually goes in this direction, clockwise rather than counterclockwise. So it doesn't make a huge difference in most drafting situations, but in some of our programs like Extruded Product Builder and Solid Model Analyzer, if you're using parts like this, it could make a difference in, and obviously when you're on your nest drawing, the direction of that your router travels in, it makes a difference. So whether you're climb feeding or conventional cutting. So you do want to be sometimes aware of your circles, which direction your polyline is running in. Also note that there is a special option for polylines as to whether or not it is closed. So you could draw a polyline and jump around and then try to, well, yeah, I got a snap point there, so that works. But let's see if this one's closed or not. So I drew a polyline that started and ended at exactly the same point, but it's not a closed polyline. So that would cause problems with Extruded Product Builder because it's expecting a closed polyline to define your parts. So what you want to do if you're trying to make a closed polyline, you can't snap to the existing point. What you do is you do a polyline, click around, and then you see here there's an option for close. So you can hit C and enter, and it will draw a line from your most recent point to the start point, and it will close that entity that you're creating here now. So now it's a closed polyline rather than just a polyline. So we're good to go there. So it's a closed polyline, and we want to keep track of that to find out whether or not objects are closed. You don't necessarily want to close a polyline that has the endpoint and the start point at the same place after the fact, because it will create an extra vector. So let's watch this. It starts at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then 6 is at the same point as 1. If I hit close, and let me demonstrate on a different object. So polyline, click around, and if I hit close on this, it's going to draw an additional line to close that object. It's going to do the same thing even though these 2 points are at the same location. So if I hit close, and remember there were 6 6 points going around. If I hit close, you notice the grip point gets a little flattened and it looks different from the other corners. I can hit current vertex, go around. Now I get 6 and 1 at that same point. So 6 and 1 still exist. They're both at the same location, but they both still exist. So it's an extra vector when it goes to your CNC. It's going to, it may not have a pause there, but it will try and insert that as a vector even though it's in the same spot. So it's just a little, it's not as clean and it's not recommended. So what I'm going to do is change one of these these vertexes, either 1 or 6, and now it draws them off of each other. So now you can see 1 and 6 and the line that's connecting them. And then if you want to eliminate that, you just hover over it and remove vertex. Now I have only 5 points and current vertex 1, current vertex 5. That's where they are. It's not showing it. Come on. I don't know why the indicator went away, but yeah, so it was there and the 5 points all the way around and the start point ends up back at the start point. Very good. Okay. All right, so grips. We've talked a little bit about grips so far, but if you select a grip, there's a little bit more to talk about. If you select any corner, you can easily move the corner around and it changes your geometry. So you can bring these around and just drop it. What it starts with always is it starts with a stretch command. And so it'll always just be stretching the one point that you've selected. And so that's good to work with. But if you select a grip point, it popped up really quick, but it's going away. It says specify stretch point or press control to cycle between stretch. No, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm actually looking for a different set of options. If you select a grip point and then press enter, right now we're on stretch. You press enter or spacebar. Those are interchangeable. If you press spacebar, it'll move on to a different command. So I've got this grip point selected and I pushed enter. It would have been a stretch, but now I hit enter and now it's a move command. So it's now a move command. If I hit enter again, I can move this around. It's already got my base point selected, and now I push my endpoint, and it's going to move the entire object there. But if I select enter, and I'm back at the move command, if I push enter again, it's a rotate command off of that exact grip point. So I can type in an angle, or I can just spin it around and watch it for a bit. So you can hit rotate, or you can hit spacebar again, and it's now a scale command. Scale is a little harder to use for this one because typically you don't want to go more than double, but it bases this command off of your units. So right now I'm at a scale factor of, and then I drag it out, it's at 14, 19, so it's becoming 19 times the size. So if I wanted to make this half the size, I type in 0.5, and now it shrunk half size. So this is that's the third command on the list is scale. So move, stretch, move, rotate, and then scale. And the next one, this is mirror. So if I wanted to mirror along this line, I could hit that, and now I've got an object that's mirrored on that line. So these grip points, they're kind of helpful, and it could be a shortcut because you don't have to type in anything. You can just hit a grip point if you know that that's what you want to use as your base point, and then just hit spacebar a couple times, and you've got a bunch of different commands. So you got move, rotate, scale, mirror, and you're back to stretch. So those are the basic modify commands, which we've already taught you about, but it's that's another way to access them, and it could be faster, it could be easier to remember. And then if you grip the midpoint, you've got the stretch command again, and it stretches the 2 points on that line. So it's the same as if you hit stretch and then stretch and then that, grab that. But with this one, you get to specify your base point, whereas this one, you have your grip and you're going to drag it. So These are all of the points where you could interact with your object. Okay, good, good. All right, so modifying, that's most of what you're doing in AutoCAD is modifying the objects that you've created. So you definitely want to be familiar with all of the tools that are available. If you need these, this is the list of them. Oh, here's your draw order. Couldn't find it in the ribbon earlier, but yeah, you have draw order there. So being familiar with all of these commands is essential, and it can make you a very good drafter and make you faster at your job. All right. Okay. Oh, there you go. There you go. Okay, so unless there's questions about the modify commands, we'll move on to blocks. So let me know in the comments if you need any help with that. Okay. All right, so moving right along to blocks. Blocks are a unit of your drawing. It's a way to group parts and simplify things. So if I use this cabinet over and over and over again in a job, sorry, use these objects, because if you're using an actual cabinet drawn by Microvellum, you would do it a different way. But if I was just going to use these AutoCAD objects, these lines, I'm going to copy it out and put it somewhere else so I can work with it. If I was going to use something like this over and over and over again in my job, similar to an array command or similar to a copy command, I could instead turn it into a block. And blocks always stay together. They're a very well-contained unit. It's a self-contained unit that has certain properties about it. So what I could do is turn this into a block. There's two ways to do that. You can use W block or B block. B block is going to is the one that I use the most often. You can just type in a block definition, you specify the objects about it, and it will create a block definition in this drawing. I'm going to go through that one in just a second, but I'll show you how W block works differently. A W block will create a separate drawing from the objects that you have here. So if, for instance, you're in a job and you've drawn up the profile for a piece of hardware that you know you're going to need over and over again, you could draw in just that job and then go on to the next job and then draw it again and draw it again and draw it again. But you know you don't want to do that because you'd rather just draw it once and then be able to refer back to that same drawing that you created earlier. So you could create an entirely separate drawing and use that as your source for a block. So you could specify a base point for it, specify objects, and then it will create a new DWG in a specific location. So for instance, your documents folder, and place those objects that you've got into that drawing. And you'd have to go there to modify it if you ever did. So you could do that, or you could use what's called the B block command. And you can just create a block for this drawing, and then you could copy it and paste it into other drawings, which is what I would actually recommend is that you create a block, you modify it, and then it's ready for you to go, and you can test it in this drawing before you save it anywhere else. So most people, they'll have a blocks drawing somewhere, and they refer back to that drawing, and anytime you want to edit a block, you go back to that drawing, you edit it, and it's a template for your blocks. So we do something similar with the Microvellum blocks, but this is just for AutoCAD blocks. For myself, I have naming conventions that I try to follow. Microvellum does something similar where they put 2D in the front of any block name, and that will specify whether it's 2D or 3D. So it's a 2D block of, let's see, cabinet 1. So, or a base cab, which would be a little bit more descriptive. Base cab, you could call it base cab with a blind or just base cab. I'm just going to say base cab, and then I'm going to specify which view it is of this cabinet. So it's plan. So I'm going to give, anytime I'm trying to reference this drawing, it's going to say that it's a 2D, and then it's a base cabinet, and it's the plan view of that cabinet. So I know exactly what it is trying to specify, because you're going to have a left elevation, right elevation, front elevation. You could have all of these things in a drawing, but for our purposes, 2D and plan are typical, and then where you're going to have is the description or whatever description you want to have of it. So I've got my base point as specify on screen. So it's going to, you can click, or you could say not and then specify exactly where your base point is. But we'll do pick point, and then which objects you want to include in the block. I'm also going to specify on screen. And I don't necessarily want to retain those objects as not a block. I want to convert them to a block. You could also delete them, but it's okay. Annotative is something we'll talk about tomorrow. Scale uniformly is, it scales them. And then allow exploding is whether or not you want people, after they've inserted it, to be able to just hit X and explode the drawing. So I usually have that on just because if I know I don't want to explode it, then I just don't explode it. But if you want to prevent people from exploding it, you can hit that box. Then also the insertion units as inches, you can do that as well. So we're going to hit OK, and it's going to ask us to have our insertion base point. Just because it's our standard, I'm going to use the back left corner, and then specify insertion. So we've already done that. We're going to select which objects we want to include in the block. So we're going to get everything and hit enter. Okay, now these objects no longer have their individual grip points. If I select it, you get one grip point for that entire block. This prevents things from getting modified, but it also prevents things from getting modified. So you've got a block, and you can place this block anywhere you want. So I perhaps want to add another cabinet here. Done. And now I don't have to worry about that stuff all moving around. Then I can click on this elevation, this countertop drawing, drag it out to here. Then I can even do a stretch command. Oops, I got that wrong. Let me undo. Drag that out to the perpendicular spot instead of wherever I gripped it. Okay, got that. Now I can even use a stretch command over the top of this block. And if I do that, it's not going to do anything because I did not grab the grip point for that block. So it's not going to have any effect on the block, and I can put out my 0.625. Now I have my overhang on this cabinet, and I've got an additional cabinet on this set of this drawing. So you can right-click and go into block editor. So we're going to do that a little bit now. It's that's a very fun and very powerful tool. So you can right-click and do block editor. And now it opens it up as if it was its own drawing. So there's nothing else in this drawing. It's just this block, and you can focus on it. The 0, 0 point is used as the insertion point. So that back corner is where cabinets are going to get dropped in. You can now select and modify the layer for each of those. If you go back to home, here's another instance of the ribbon popping up with a contextual editor. This tab didn't exist previously. When I opened the block editor, it opened this tab, and now it has all of these options that allow you to edit blocks. And we're going to get into some of these. I think it's the third day of this course, and show you how you can make dynamic blocks. But for the purposes of today, we just show you how you can edit lines and modify blocks within this interface. So I'm on the block editor tab. I can go back to the home tab, and I know I put some of these on that 0.5. I'm going to take that off and go back to the by layer setting. So now none of them have overrides for the layers. And hit escape. Okay. So I've got that set. What else I'm going to do is set these to a 0 layer. Now, as I mentioned, you don't want to use a 0 layer very often, but in this case, we're within a block, so it does something special. This 0 layer will allow these lines to inherit the properties of the entire block. So if I set all of these to 0, they would all function that way. But a lot of times you're going to want to set your block components to the 0 layer, and I'll show you why. So close block editor, save the changes, and now you can see that it applied to this block. Let's copy this block out actually. I'm going to copy it back over here so that we can see it. Okay, so now they're all blue, which you might be wondering why, because some of them were black in the block editor. The ones I turned to 0 layer were black. But if you look at the block is on the layer finished parts. If I change that to countertops, you'll notice the lines that I put on the 0 layer inherit the layer specification of the entire block. So if you have a block that you put in and you don't necessarily know what layer some of the objects should be on, then what you do is you put that on the countertop, or sorry, you put the lines on the 0 layer, and they will be able to inherit the properties of the block and whatever layer you put that block on. So let's go back to the block editor, and I think I actually want this one, because it's not a finished end always, to also be on that. And now it is on the countertops layer, which you can change as finished or unfinished parts, and now you're good. So let me also, kind of picky, let's match properties to this, and I gotta explode then, and match properties to that. There. Close block editor. Save changes. Done. In some cases, you do have to erase an object and reinsert it in order for it to recognize the new setup for it. So if at any time you go into block editor, make some changes, and then come back out and it didn't actually change anything, what you can do is erase the blocks. Whatever changes you did didn't take effect. You can erase the blocks and insert, and you can hit this drop down and it'll show you all of the blocks in the drawing. This is the only block that I have in this drawing, so this is the insertion. You could also use this to create new blocks, but I usually just copy an existing. So insert is INS. So insert brings up this dialog. You pick which block, and you can say you want to specify an insertion point, or you can have it automatically insert there. You can scale it or not, and you can rotate it or not, but it's very easy to do. Just to come in here, select which block, and say OK. Then I'm going to specify the insertion point, and because I'm on the finished parts layer, it all came in on finished parts, but I want to change that to unfinished parts. Okay, so now you've got an option, and you can drag and drop it in here. Now you can't. Okay, so let me demonstrate also what happens when you make a change to a block. So let's put a dozen of these. Say it's referenced all throughout your drawing, and you realize, oh, well, this one needs a finished end. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to right-click. Sorry, I clicked on the gizmo. Right-click, and block editor. I'm going to change this to a finished end. So I'm going to go over here and say I want that to be a finished end. So, okay, well, I think I'm doing something good. Save and close. I've now got a finished end. Looks great. But if you scroll over and look at all of the other locations where you use that block, it now has a finished end everywhere, whether it is up against a cabinet or not. So you're going to have instances like this, and it's not right. It's in the wrong spot. So it's good to keep in mind that every iteration of a block is a copy of the first one, and all of them share the same definition. So when you go and you say edit block, you're editing the block definition And all of these objects in the drawing all similarly refer to that same block definition. So you want to keep in mind that's both the power and the caution of using blocks is, and we'll get into deeper subjects a bit later of how you can get around this and how you can make blocks that are smarter. But in general, when you make a change to a block, it changes all other references to that block. So in a lot of cases, it's great. But in other cases, such as this case, you definitely want to be cautious about that block and making changes to it. All right. Very good. Any questions about blocks? Please feel free to let us know. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Moving right along. Okay. Yeah, it looks like we sufficiently covered all of our information about blocks for at this time. We are definitely going to get deeper into blocks when we get into sheet set manager and annotative objects. But yeah, definitely at this point, this is all that we need to know about blocks. Okay. All right. So next topic is layouts. So we're finally moving out of the black screen. Going to go on to the paper space. Speaking of black screen and white screen, you can change what color this is, but it's much easier on my eyes to have a black model space, and then in paper space, it'll often have a white background, just because that's my preference. But you can change that at any time. Also, this will help you see what it's going to look like on the white piece of paper. So I tend to leave this one now as white. So to switch between model space and paper space, this is the full model space. This is model space by definition. There is another, well, I'll show you in just a second how you can access model space through paper space, but this is, when I refer to model space, it's the model tab and model space. So if you click on this next tab, it will give you a piece of paper, and we call that paper space. So you can set these up to be different sizes. This is a 1-to-1 scale of what is going to be printed. And so on this piece of paper, this is, I believe it's 8.5 by 11. Just double check that real quick. Yeah, 8.5 by 11. So this is a regular piece of home printer paper. And what you have on it is what's called a viewport. If you look at the properties, you can see it's called a viewport. What a viewport does is offers you a window into model space from paper space. So you've done all of this drawing in model space to create all of these entities, and you drew them all perfectly to scale, 1-to-1 ratio. Then you come to this piece of paper, it's 11 by 17. Nothing's going to fit on there in 1-to-1 scale. So you need to scale it down. So what you have is this viewport that offers you a window into model space. If you double click inside of it, you can then scroll around and move around, look around. I am definitely going to turn off grid so that we can see. And you can then scroll around. As you scroll in and out, you're changing the scale. So this is obviously a bigger scale than if you zoomed out, that'd be a smaller scale. So these are 24 by 24, so we're scaling down quite a bit in order to get this on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. But you want this to be accurate. So you go to this interface here on the bottom right to adjust the scale of the selected viewport. Being in a viewport counts as selecting it. Color changing of model and paper space. I just got a question on that. So that's an option under Options, Display, and Colors. If you go to Colors, you can change the sheet or layout color, and you can change it to black or red or yellow or whatever you'd like it to be. And paper background, whatever you'd like. That's sheet layout, 2D model space, any other spaces. You can change the colors. So just a little side note because there was a question on that. Cancel. Okay. Selecting a viewport and changing the scale will work, or double-clicking inside the viewport is typically how I do it, but you could do it either way. So if you click on that, you'll notice you have a list of scales. And we're going to get into more of these when we're using annotative scaling because they have a bigger impact. But for this layout, it's just setting the scale for this viewport. So if I wanted to show these cabinets at 1/2 inch equals a foot, I just select 1/2 inch equals a foot, and it does the scaling for me. Because it's kind of small, I want to zoom in. So I'm going to do 1 inch equals a foot. Perfect. That is well framed, leaves me a bit of space on all sides. I can now double click out. Now, you can also change the definition of this viewport by using the grip points. And I'm not sure if this is coming across for you, but the grip points are not in the right location. So I'm just going to have to know where they are. So click on that and drag these out. Click on that, drag that in. I don't want to see the adjacent geometry, so I'm going to move that in as well and cut that out. Okay. Okay. So now I have this sheet of paper and it's got my plan section on it. That is great. It is scaled. It looks good. If I go to print preview, I've got none selected. So we're going to get into this interface in a minute, but I just want to demonstrate how something doesn't quite look right. So I'm going to print PDF and preview. I've got a square box around that, and I don't quite like that. No, now you can see the line weights as well, but I don't really like that box around it because I don't need it. It looks confusing. So I'm going to get out of here, and that's the viewport that was creating that box. What you can do is change that to the viewport layer that we set up earlier. In Microvellum templates, this is already set up. You have a viewport layer, and it has a specific property for that layer that we're going to change right now. So if you go to your layers interface and you scroll over to the right, yeah, you're going to be looking at the viewport layer. Scroll to the right or drag this out, make it a little bigger so you can see it. Okay. Okay, so drag this out. Come on. There we go. All right, so there's a special property here. It's under plot. You can turn this to be a non-plotting layer, and it will never show up on your prints. So that's what we want for this viewport layer. We don't ever want it to show up in the prints. It's okay that we can see it here, but we just don't want it to show up in the prints. Now, if you plot, it will not show that black line around your border. So like that, and it looks good. Okay, so these pieces of cabinetry are properly scaled at 1:1. This is all here. It's all good. You can use the same interfaces, the same view changing options in this. You can zoom in and out as I demonstrated, or you can still pan and center things properly. And it's very helpful viewport. So that's good. That's good. Okay. And we've got 8.5 by 11. So if I was to roll my scroll wheel while I was double clicked in this viewport, it would change the scale. I don't want that to happen. I set it to a scale. I wanted to stay to that scale. So let me set it back to 1 inch to the foot. And then I'm going to select the viewport. And you can either go to properties and find this special property for this viewport is display locked. And you can change that to yes. Or even easier is down here in this toolbar, right where you change the scale, there's a little lock button. And you can hit that lock button and it will lock the viewports. Now, when you double click inside the viewport and you scroll in and out, it won't move anywhere. It'll scale your paper space and zoom in and out on your paper space rather than on your model space. So very helpful tip. I always recommend locking your viewports once you have your objects selected, and then you're good to go. So the nice thing about viewports is that you can have multiple viewports on any page. So we'll just move that viewport out of the way. You can copy an existing viewport, no issue with that. But so you can just copy, paste, and now you've got 2 copies of that exact same thing. Or If you don't have any viewports on the page, you can go to View and create a rectangular viewport or a polyagonal or from an object. So this is a very nice one. I very much like it when I get an opportunity to use a round viewport, because it's not something that everybody does or everybody gets an option to use. But if you, for instance, wanted to give a zoomed in detail of this section, so let me draw a circle of this and then some lines. I need tangential. I need a line. Basically goes from here to there. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be close enough. Let me get tangent from there to there. And then I can move it again, get another tangent. Anyway, the more times I do that, the more accurate it's going to be. And then get another one. I'm going to go from a quadrant instead. So this is another good point. You can shift right click and temporarily add a point. So I'm going to grab a quadrant, and now I can get that tangent. Oh, that was not it. Grab that tangent. Good. Okay. So I probably, yeah, so it's not perfect, but you can keep messing with it to get it to be what you want it to be. I'm going to use trim to hit these two lines and trim out that line. Oh, sorry. No, I don't want to do that. I do want to have that full circle. Okay, so now you probably get where I'm going with this. I'm trying to create a detail of that area. So if you have a circle and you're going to zoom in on it, you can select this circle, go to create a viewport, and create a viewport from an object. So I'm going to select the circle, and now I have a round viewport. And you can make it any shape you want. But now I'm going to zoom in on that, and voila. I have a round viewport. Now these objects probably don't want them on the finished layer. I'm going to create another layer for my paperspace objects. I'm just going to call it title. So this is going to be my title layer, my title block. Notice it copied the features from the previously selected layer. So I don't want this to be a non-plot. Definitely don't want it to be cyan. I want it to be something a little darker. Let's go with, well, red's going to stand out pretty well. So let's do red. All right, good. And now I just move these objects to, except for that viewport, I'm going to move it to, got to go to the Home tab, move it to the red layer, which is title. And I missed one, so let me match properties to that. There you go. Okay, so we've got a round viewport, and I've got this area. So I got a good question from David about objects in paperspace. You can definitely have objects show and objects not show. So for instance, if this detail, one of the reasons, there's a lot of reasons objects might not be showing, but one of the reasons is layer management. So a very helpful tool for this interface is if you want to show some parts, but you don't want to show other parts. So let's say you wanted to see either the countertop or not the cabinet. Sorry, that's the same thing. If you wanted to see the countertop, then what you could do is go into this viewport and hit this drop down. You have options here. We've already used the turn a layer on or off. That turns it off. Sorry, keep the current layer on. Let me pick a different one for that, for instance. You could turn off countertops, but that turns it off everywhere. You can turn on countertops, and that brings it back. Or you can use this third option here, freeze or thaw in current viewport. So I don't want to see the cabinet parts, so I'm going to turn off the finished parts, and I'm going to turn off the unfinished parts, or freeze them at least. So freeze or thaw. Now I can get a detail of this corner, and all I see is the countertop instead of seeing both the countertop and the cabinet. So it probably makes more sense if this was a filleted corner. So you can, let me lock this because I have a fear of getting stuck in a viewport. It happens quite frequently with new users. If you zoom in too far and then double click, you can zoom in and out, in an unlocked viewport, I should say. You can zoom in and out, and you're still in paper space, working in model space, but you can't get out. You zoom in and out, you're trying to find where you can double click to get out of it, but you're kind of stuck here unless you know that you can click on this model space or paper space tab. If you have that hidden, it's under customization, but if you don't have that showing, then you'd have to type in a command. You'd have to know what command that is. But in order to get out of this situation, that's why I always lock it, is to avoid this. But to get out of it, you click on this, and then you can zoom out, and you're back in paper space, and you're safe again. So so you can use that, but I usually zoom in. You can either leave this as not to scale, or it's probably like a 6-inch. Yeah. So before I start working in this, I'm going to lock it and then fill it and say 1.5 and fill out these corners. Let me see. Fill it, radius 1.5, and hit these two. There you go. So the benefit of, instead of redrawing this, copying it over, scaling it up, is that this is a live view in both situations, in this viewport and in this viewport. It's looking at the same object in model space. So if I go back to model space, zoom in on that object, that has that curve on it now. And it's a live reference. So if I was to do anything else, if I put a chamfer, if I put anything on it, these two viewports in layout 1 are going to always have the most up-to-date information about that object in paper space, or in model space, because it's showing, it's done, it's showing that live view, and there's not a duplicate copy of it. It saves work if you ever have to change something that you've already created the detail of, because it's showing you the live view of something that actually does exist, and if those conditions ever change, it gets updated here. So there you go. So hopefully that answered your question about the layer states, if you're able to bring your stuff back. If you don't, please feel free to clarify your question and see if there's another reason that it's not showing up in your paper space. Okay, so we've got that, we got that. So okay, layouts. That was one. Okay, so we're in layouts now, and we've got one of these, one of those, and we do need a title block. I'm not going to go through the whole process of creating a title block. You probably already have your own, but you can draw lines all the way around, and looks like something on this about drawing lines is making my computer go a little bit slower, but anyway, you could draw all of these lines all the way around and create a title block. And typically title blocks, as the name implies, it's a block, and you could have them in paper space and create a viewport that shows them, but that kind of eliminates the use of the viewports, because if you're plotting from model space, you don't get to use paper space. So you always definitely want to draw your title blocks in models in paper space, and use viewports to display your objects. And anyway, I'm just trying to get this drawing to look a little bit more like a finished drawing. We're gonna start using our templates tomorrow that already have all of this set up, and you can customize them. But basically, this is similar to what you're going to see on a page. Probably not going to use red lines. You'd use like a black or something. But if you go to plot, and then you take a look at this again, so you got a couple options, but let me just look at this and do a plot preview. There you go. It's putting it down in the bottom left corner, but there are options that we can use to fix that and set that up properly. But we did have all of our objects and we didn't have our viewport. Let's just point that out one more time. The viewport didn't exist. You probably want to be able to see the outline for this viewport, but you wouldn't want to see the square outline for the other viewports. So you're good to go. All right, so the circle outline is probably a good one, but yeah, in most cases you're going to want to put your viewports on the viewport layer so they don't show in your plots. Okay, looks good. All right. All right, next topic is creating callouts. Similar to what we kind of did here. We started doing a callout for a detail, but you can add a whole lot more. So this is an instance where you definitely want to have text on your drawing to explain what some of these things are. So you can do something like an M text. M text stands for multi-line, and that's much too large. So I'm going to click the extents of that. So I just did MT. I click there and I click here, and you can set the size of your text, the text height. This is actual units in Paperspace. So 13 is much too large. I can do 0.25. Quarter inch is pretty standard for text. And so I've got that in there, and I'm going to type in a test. There you go. So I got a 1/4 inch text that is, or sorry, I got text that is a 1/4 inch high. I typed in test, and you can change what layer that's on. And I'm probably going to want it on the title layer as well. You can, yeah, I probably should, now that I'm working in Paperspace, switch to the title layer, and now everything that I draw is going to be by default on the title layer. So I've got a test. I'm going to move it over here. To edit mtext, you can double click, and that's funny, by layer is not what it should be. So let's see, that one, by layer. It's just, I think my interface is getting a little buggy, but we shall push through. And so if you type in here what you want to call this call out, so we'll see that countertop edge detail. No, this is corner detail. Let's see, radius. So countertop radius detail, right? Countertop radius corner detail. I can move this around. It looks like it's a little bit too far down to fit on this page. So I'm going to stretch. And if you do a window command and you grab things that you don't want to do, you don't want to use, I can stretch all this, but I want to deselect that viewport and deselect this viewport. So now I've just got these lines and that circle. And I'm going to see if I can move it up a little bit. Yeah, so I moved it. It's not quite enough. Let's just use this text, drag it out, move it down. Now I could definitely fit one line in here. Anyway, I'll probably want to abbreviate that to make it shorter. Now trim that. There you go. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So countertop radius corner detail. So on a radius corner, I want to show this detail. So my next object, or my next objective, is to change, or to show what the radius of this corner is. So if I come up here to annotation, you've got your option for multi-line text. Then you've got this leader, or sorry, linear. These are leaders. Linear is your dimensions. So you can put in a dimension. A good dimension to have is probably the overall countertop width. Got that. Drag it up, and it's on there, and it's in decimal. You can change these, but it's definitely not within our time limit for today. Yeah, I can put in that. Then I can also hit this drop down. So that's just a regular linear dimension. I'm going to add one more to get the depth of this countertop overall. And linear dimensions will always give you a straight dimension. If you hit this drop down, you can get an aligned dimension. So I'm going to demonstrate that one now too with this angled countertop. So this angled countertop, I want the extension of that line. So let me get the extension of this line. Come on. All right, it's not giving it to me. So it looks like I have to draw a couple of reference lines to get the intersection point of these two. It's not really, yeah, that is what I wanted to mention. So let me get this there and draw that. Get the intersection, nope. All right, I'm gonna have to put this point here and then fill it between the two of them. Oh, fillet radius 0. And fill it between the two of these. Okay, now I can put my line dimension, have my start point and my end point. Aligned that to that. Okay. It's coming up as 2 inches because I'm snapping to a point that's in paper space. So in paper space, this is 2 inches from here to there. I don't care what it is in paper space. So I'm going to match properties to this other piece of text, and it's going to swap that for using the dimensions for model space, because this one's set. I dimensioned a piece of or something in model space to something in model space, so it knows that I want the actual dimension from model space, but this one was a little wonky, so so I just did match properties and it affected that across. Okay, so it's important to note that all of these dimensions are in paper space. They will only show in paper space. If I go back to model space, I don't have any dimensions in model space. So when you want to show dimensions in more than one location, you can put it in model space. That's fine. That is totally a reasonable expectation. Sometimes you're going to want a dimension that shows up in multiple locations. So put it in model space, and then you won't have to dimension it on every single page as you lay it out. But if you want to keep your model space clean and you know you're only doing this the one time, you can definitely put that across here, and it's only going to show in your paper space. So all right, so we've got some linear dimensions, an aligned dimension, and then you can hit this button if you want to do the command again, but you hit the drop down if you want to change which command you're using. You can get the length of an arc, which might be helpful in some cases if you're trying to get like an edge banding estimate. You can get a very accurate edge banding estimate if you get the arc length of this arc. There you go. That arc is 2.3562 long, and you can add that to whatever other totals you have. However, what we're more looking for is the radius of this corner. So you hit the corner, or you hit the arc, and it's going to give you a leader with the radius on it. You could drag it out to other locations, or now, yeah, so radius 1.5. So there you go, radius 1.5. Okay, look at this. Oh, here we go. That's why. I changed the color in the wrong part. Viewport color, red. Title, I want color, cyan. Red. Okay, it was starting to get to me why that was. Okay, yeah, now they both match. I think that was why I was getting some funny coloring. Okay, multi-liters. All right, so we got a 1 liter, but it's actually a dimension technically. If you wanted to get a diameter, you could. You could get yeah, you can get dimensions that they kind of use on more like site plans. Get a jog dimension. You could do something like that. But usually the ones you're going to use are these linear, aligned, angular. Forgot to do that one. So if you hit 2 lines that form an angle, you get a readout of what the angle between those 2 lines is. So that's helpful. Then you've got, okay, so we've covered all of the dimension lines. Now let's get into, next thing is the multi-liters. So multi-liter, so let's see. Let's just put a leader on this door, and we'll call that forgot caps lock, finish exterior. Okay, finished exterior, done. That kind of makes sense. It's a leader attached to a door. The door is going to have a finished exterior. So any notes that you want to put that have to point to something. So if you were just putting general notes over here, you just use an M text and you'd put all your notes over here. But if you had something that you needed to point at, then you could use a pointer multi-leader. At this point, we know we have extra doors, but we're not going to put an individual label for each to say finished exterior, finished exterior, finished exterior. What we can do is add leader. So we'll hit that line, tag another one, done. And then when you move this guy around, it will adjust. So I know I have it over here because then I've got all my lines coming off of one side. It looks great. But if you had things that were further apart, you could center this and the leaders would come off both sides and have the same extension distance on both sides and come off of the center of the line. And so that looks really nice. It stays in format and stays the way that you'd expect it to be if you're looking for it. So I'm going to put it back this way because I like that way. If you select this and you go into properties, there are a lot of properties for it. You could change the contents, you could change the text style, all of these things. Feel free to look through them. You can mess with these and it'll just change what it looks like. So yeah, justification, direction, all of those things. Very, very intricate things that you can change about all of this leader style. So yeah, multi-leaders. Okay, good. Okay, all right. Getting near the end of our session. So we've covered dimensions and leaders. Now let's get into our printing. So please feel free. We're getting close to the end of the session. Give us any comments or questions that you have or you need answered before the end of the session, and we will definitely cover those. Okay, so all right, moving right along to printing. So I told you we'd get back to the plotting, that plotting tab. If you go into layout, but by the way, you can double click on this and type in whatever you want to call this, and your layout tab will get renamed, so you can easily differentiate between layouts. So if I wanted, for instance, to change this, or maybe I decide that this is not enough room for everything that I'm trying to show, I can go to Layout 2 and go to Page Setup Manager. Page Setup Manager for Layout 2. Currently it's 8.5 by 11, but I decided that's not big enough. So I'm going to go to Modify, and I'm going to change the paper size to whatever you typically use. So let's do 11 by 17. Looks good. 11 by 17. This might be this might be vertical. I might need 17 by 11, but let's check it. No, it turned out horizontal. Okay, so that's landscape mode. We're good. Let's get back into the modify. So we've got ANSI 11 by 17. Plot area. What to plot? Layout. Layout is typically what you want because it will limit itself to the plotter borders, the plotter extents. So if you have margins that your plotter is not capable of doing, it will show you that and it won't plot anything outside of that. Extents is more for if you have something that overlaps or goes beyond those borders and you're printing to PDF, which doesn't have borders, then you could do extents. Or if you're printing something for checks, you can do a display or a window. And window's pretty nice because you can just say, oh, well, I just want to see how big that would be. So we're going to go back to layout, and we're going to print the layout. We're going to plot the layout. One of the first things you want to do really is set your plotter or printer. I've just got my home printer here, so um, paper size, not supported, so okay, fine. Let me just do a PDF, and then I can take the PDF to a printer, and they'll print it for me, so that's good. So Microsoft print a PDF, legal. So 8.5 by 14. No, that's not right. 8.5 by 11. I really did want to show you the 11 by 17 though, so I'm gonna switch back to that. 11 by 17. All right, so plot offset. This is to center things up and move it around to the center. This is the one area where I do sometimes use extents. If I have a setup that is already set up for a different printer or plotter, and I know it's the right size, I just don't want to mess with the plot offset to find the X and Y for the plotter offset. You can use extents, and then it's going to center the plot. This works if you have a title block that fills the layout, because then it's going to center the title block in the page and you're good to go. But if you don't have a title block that fills the space, it's just going to center your objects. So if I go back to PDF, preview, it centered my objects. It didn't, also it zoomed, but it centered the objects. If I had a title block around it, it would have fit better. So if that, yeah, so that's the plot offset. That moves your paper into the center, and it auto-fills the plot offset. But if I was to say 0.5, then it's going to give me more similar to where I want that actually to end up, and then do layout. So now it shows that I've got something overhanging, which, yeah, so the layout, if I do layout, then I'm going to want to go back to 0, 0. So no offset, we're good. But if you notice that when you plot, it's running off the page, you can use the plot offset to bring it back on the page. You could do negatives as well. Okay, another option that's only available if you're doing extents or something else is the fit to paper. So if you're plotting something and you have 11 by 17 drawing, but you just want to see it on a smaller piece of paper before you print it out full size, you can go to a smaller size and then scale it, fit to paper, and then it'll fit to that paper. The other thing that I was talking about was plot style table pen assignments. This is a very helpful and very powerful tool when plotting. So you can set your pens, is what it calls them, to use certain plot style table assignments. So for instance, this Toolbox CTV is the one that comes with Toolbox. It uses this configuration to change all of your colors to a black and white. I'm not seeing it here. General plot style. It's not doing it. So let me see. Grayscale. So, so it converts your colors into line weights, and it changes all of your colors to black and white. Oh, there it is, grayscale on, that's why. I was missing it, use object color, but no, it's grayscale, and converts it to grayscale. Let's cancel, let's look at that again. Grayscale off, pen automatic, line tape, use object, line tape. Okay, so it converts your objects to black. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it in this view, but it will convert all of your colors to a black color and then use a different line weight. So that's what your Toolbox CTB does, and it So depending on the darkness of the color, it will give a darker line and a thicker line. So that's what this interface does. And it converts all of your colors into black and white so that you're not printing out like fuchsia lines and those types of objects. Okay, shaded viewport options. If you do something in 3D and you want to show it from an isometric view and you want to shade it and you want to show that, you can shade plot. Right now it's as displayed, but you can change that. You change your quality, and so you'll give the impression of it being solid objects with the shaded viewport. Okay. Then you've got plot options, plot object line weights. So as we saw in our preview, these have a line weight. This blue line's not as dark of a line as that purple line would be. So you can plot that or not. Plot transparency, whether or not objects are transparent. Plot with plot styles, that's these plot tables. Plot paper space last, that's your paper space. So when it's generating the image that it sends to your printer, it's going to plot your model space objects over and over and over, and then your paper space object. Then, yeah, hide paper space objects, whether the hide command will hide things. Okay, then your drawing orientation is more to do with your plotter, whether it's portrait or landscape or upside down. So okay, if you hit OK, then this is just in page setup. So we're just setting up this page. And so now we've got our objects, move it to the middle. I'm going to actually erase this and take everything that was on this page. So Control A, and then I'm going to hit Control C at 0, 0. And then layout 2, Control V at 0, 0. And refresh, come on. There it is, there's all my stuff. And move that in to here. So obviously I have more room than I did on the previous page. So I can stretch this down. Not these, just this. And I accidentally did that one. So yeah. Undo. Okay, so we're definitely at about the end of our session for today. So if you have questions on things we've done or something that you want me to review, then let's definitely do that at this point. I'm just going to continue cleaning up this drawing while I wait for questions to come in. Oh, got one. Not a question, just a comment. Thank you. Okay, and so we got a little bit more room. Can move this around. Rectangle and circle 0. Yeah, that's all right. Okay. Okay. Well, if there's no questions for review, then I'm going to call it a wrap. Thank you all. Hopefully see you again tomorrow, and have a great day.